The foreign being that had just spoken was naturally enraged by the woman's defiance, and he didn't waste any further time with words as he let loose a sharp cry. A buzzing sound immediately rang out from the four battle carriages before they all converged toward the same carriage, combining as one to form a battle carriage that was several times the size of the original individual carriages. This carriage was over 100 feet in length and was rhomboid in shape. There was a beast head that resembled a worm, but also a python, on the front of the carriage, and as soon as this giant battle carriage appeared, rainbow light flashed in the surrounding area, following which two pairs of thin and long dragonfly-like wings appeared. The woman and elderly man were both quite alarmed to see this. "Hurry!" The elderly man was relatively kind of heart and abruptly cautioned Quirrell before hurrying forward. The streak of light that he was situated in combined with that of the woman, and their collective speed more than doubled. Almost at the exact same moment, the battle carriage flapped its four wings, and red light flashed through the eyes of the beastly head, following which it abruptly vanished on the spot. With the reminder extended toward her by the elderly man, Quirrell had naturally sensed what was happening behind her, and she was greatly alarmed as white light flashed from her body in an attempt to unleash an acceleration secret technique at the expense of her true essence. However, it was already too late. Spatial fluctuations appeared in the air above, following which a burst of azure light abruptly flashed. A burst of unpleasant cackling rang out, and a giant hand that was several tens of feet in size emerged from the azure light before reaching down toward Quirrell. Quirrell wasn't their target, but seeing as they had chased her down, there was certainly no reasons for them let her go. Quirrell's expression changed drastically as she gritted her teeth before making a hand seal, upon which hundreds of thin blades swept toward the giant hand in a flash. "Ahem!" A slight cry of surprise rang out from within the battle carriage, but the giant hand showed no sign of stopping. Instead, it released a burst of green light from its palm to sweep aside most of the flying blades amid a rumbling boom, while the giant hand continued to descend. "Arg!" Quirrell's face had turned deathly pale as she looked on at the gigantic hand. She knew that her powers were nowhere near enough to ward off this astonishing attack. In this dire situation, a cold harumph suddenly rang out from nearby. The harumph wasn't very loud, but for some reason it was quite clearly audible to everyone. Immediately thereafter, silver light flashed, and a massive silver seal that was around an acre in size appeared in midair. The sound of howling wind and rumbling thunder rang out before the giant seal crashed down toward the huge hand. A resounding boom rang out, and the giant hand was quite massive in itself, but there was no way it could withstand an attack from the huge seal, which was comparable in size to a small mountain. Thus, the giant hand was instantly reduced to nothingness amid a thunderous explosion. "Who's there? Who dares to oppose our wrong race?" An enraged roar rang out from within the azure light, and the spiritual light faded to reveal the rhomboid battle carriage with its pairs of transparent wings flapping incessantly. There were four humanoid figures that were enshrouded entirely in green light standing atop the carriage, and at first glance, they resembled humans, but upon closer inspection, it was quite clear that they were completely different from normal humans. Not only were their entire bodies covered in coarse green fur, they had sinister jackal-like heads that were quite harrowing to behold. "Seeing as you dared to attack my servant, I'll let you have a taste of my new treasure." A cold male voice rang out, following which a young man with a pair of translucent wings appeared out of thin air. He raised a hand, and spiritual light flashed as a shimmering silver ruler appeared. This was naturally none other than Han Li, who had virtually instantly arrived on the scene through the power of his thunderstorm wings. The silver seal from earlier was formed by the heavenly astral seal, and with his recent drastic power boost, the treasure was far more powerful than before, thereby allowing it to easily destroy that giant hand. Han Li had now fully recovered his magic power and had just refined the chaotic origin ruler, so he naturally wasn't fearful in the slightest toward these four foreign beings. Furthermore, the fact that they had attempted to kill Quirrell had ignited the killing intent in his heart, and he immediately flicked his wrist as the chaotic origin ruler let loose a low ringing sound. Countless ruler projection then appeared before surging forward in a frenzy. "Thank you for saving me, Master." Fellow Taoist Han." Two different voices sounded in unison, the first of which was Quirrell's elated cry of gratitude, while the other was an expression of surprise from the elderly man that was fleeing up ahead. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he cast his gaze toward the distance, where both the woman and the elderly man had already stopped and revealed themselves. The elderly man was a little familiar, while the woman was instantly recognizable to him. She was none other than the fairy Yue who had led the other team into the vast glacial realm back in Cloud City. A hint of surprise also appeared in the woman's eyes at the sight of Han Li, while the elderly man heaved a long sigh of relief. In his eyes, even though Han Li's inclusion still wouldn't make them a match for these wrong beings, it significantly increased their chances of survival. Furthermore, he clearly recalled that Han Li was the leader of the other group, so perhaps there were more heavenly cloud beings nearby who could lend them some assistance. Han Li was also rather taken aback, but he merely nodded at the two of them before the ruler projections in front of him hurtled directly toward the four foreign beings. Boundless silver light surged through the air, creating an extremely astonishing sight to behold. The four wrong beings on the flying carriage were initially startled by this turn of events before two of them immediately sprang into action. One of them flipped a hand over to produce a black flag, which he waved through the air to send countless black chains hurtling toward the oncoming ruler projections. Meanwhile, the other wrong being opened his mouth to expel a green copper mirror that instantly swelled to several feet in size. Green light flashed from the surface of the mirror, and boundless green flames erupted forth, sweeping through the air in a frenzy. The other two wrong beings merely appraised Han Li in a cold manner, displaying no intention of attacking. They were clearly of the opinion that their two companions would be more than enough to take down Han Li. Han Li's lips twitched slightly upon seeing this, and brilliant azure light erupted from his ruler-wielding hand as pure spiritual power gushed into the chaotic origin ruler in a frenzy. The slightly blurry ruler projections in the air immediately became a lot more substantial amid violent flashes of spiritual light, transforming into silver rulers that were around half a foot in length each with silver arcs of lightning flashing over their surfaces. A loud rumbling boom rang out, and countless silver rulers rushed into the black chains and green flames before immediately gaining the upper hand. So it seems he's not just some pushover. One of the two foreign beings who hadn't attacked furrowed his brows upon seeing this before sweeping a sleeve toward Han Li, sending a crimson bead flying toward him amid a flash of red light. The treasure flashed before expanding to around the size of a human head. Red runes were surging all over its surface, and fiery clouds began to appear out of thin air. Han Li looked on from afar as these scenes unfolded before he narrowed his eyes and suddenly reached out with an inky black hand. A small black mountain that was around 10 feet tall immediately appeared above the huge bead before plummeting downward, and the foreign being who had just summoned the bead was given quite a fright. This bead was not a treasure to be used in direct clashes with other treasures. The wrong being hurriedly made a hand seal, and the huge red bead swayed before conjuring up a dozen or so identical projections that shot forth in all directions. Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he immediately pointed a finger at the small black mountain, upon which it suddenly vanished amid a flash of gray light. In the next instant, gray light flashed in the air above one of the beads, and the small black mountain reappeared before crashing down like lightning. A resounding boom rang out as gray and red light intertwined momentarily before the bead was shattered into a fiery cloud. "How dare you break my treasure?" The foreign who had summoned the treasure immediately flew into a thunderous rage as he pointed a finger at Han Li, sending a dozen or so streaks of crimson light hurtling directly toward him. In the face of this oncoming attack, Han Li merely chuckled coldly before adjusting his artifact imprint technique, and the countless silver rulers that were dominating the black chains and green flames suddenly converged toward a single spot. A giant ruler that was several tens of feet abruptly appeared, and it was shimmering with silver light. At this moment, the dozen or so streaks of crimson light had already reached Han Li, and in response, he merely raised his inky black hand and swept it forward. A gray light barrier immediately surfaced, and the dozen or so streaks of crimson light were instantly swept up by the light barrier, thereby preventing them from advancing any further and revealing them to be a dozen or so crimson flying daggers. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li tightened his fingers around the chaotic origin ruler before swiping it through the air before him. The giant silver ruler in the distance immediately let loose a long cry that was akin to a dragon's roar, then came crashing down toward the flying carriage with devastating might. The other two wrong beings on the carriage naturally weren't going to allow this treasure to fall as it pleased. As such, both of them immediately sprang into action. The black chains surged through the air before forming a huge black net below the massive ruler, and the mirror that was blasting forth green flames also turned toward the ruler before expelling a huge pillar of green light. A muffled thump rang out, and the giant ruler was able to easily crash through the green pillar of light like a hot knife through butter. The two wrong beings who were controlling the treasures were naturally quite taken aback by this, and right at this moment, the final wrong being who had remained silent this entire time suddenly exclaimed, "Look out!" He then waved a hand upward, sending a streak of gray sword chi slashing through the air. Meanwhile, a silver shadow flashed in that direction, and a slightly blurry giant ruler appeared out of thin air. A peculiar scene then unfolded. The gray sword chi had clearly struck the silver rulers, but the former simply passed through the latter as if it were nothing more than an illusion. The giant silver ruler then appeared above the flag-wielding wrong being in a flash before crashing down with devastating force. The flag-wielding wrong being was quite alarmed by this development, and he immediately laid a hand onto the top of his own head, upon which his coarse green fur erupted through the air as a vast expanse of green light. However, the silver ruler somehow passed through the green light, but attained a substantial form once it struck the wrong being on the head. The protective spiritual light around the wrong being posed no impediment to the silver ruler, and his head was smashed open like a watermelon as blood sprayed in all directions. His headless body then tumbled down from the flying carriage, and a green shadow instantly shot forth from within it. This was the wrong being's nascent soul, and it rushed toward the mirror-wielding wrong being with a horrified look on its face. "Save me, brother Liao." However, as soon as the words escaped the nascent soul's mouth, a ruler projection instantly plummeted from above and obliterated it out of existence. The giant silver ruler then immediately conjured up three identical ruler projections that swept toward the remaining three wrong beings. The deafening sounds of fierce wings and rumbling thunderclaps rang out as the ruler projections appeared, and the remaining three wrong beings hurriedly adopted defensive measures in a fit of shock and fury. A gray veil and a black shield emerged, only for the ruler projections that struck them to immediately disintegrate into specks of silver light. Those were truly nothing more than illusionary projections. Both of those wrong beings immediately realized that they'd fallen into a trap, but it was already too late. The mirror-wielding wrong being had also released a wheel treasure to defend himself against the final ruler projection, but that projection suddenly vanished right in front of the wheel, only to reappear around a foot away from that wrong being before striking his hideous face. Lightning flashed, and countless arcs of silver lightning erupted from the ruler projection, instantly reducing the wrong being to dust without even sparing his nascent soul. The remaining two wrong beings' expressions had darkened significantly. The silver ruler circled around before conjuring up another dozen or so ruler projections that swept toward them, and one of them suddenly yelled, "Run! This man is far too powerful for us." As soon as his voice trailed off, that foreign being stomped a foot down onto the flying carriage, and it hurtled back through the air as a ball of azure light, escaping from the range of the ruler projections after just a few flashes. The other wrong being also immediately returned to his senses, and hurriedly cast an incantation seal onto the monster head carving on the front of the carriage. The flying carriage shuddered before flapping its wings, and 5-colored runes appeared all over its surface as it attempted to flee the scene. However, right at this moment, a cold voice rang out in the air above the carriage. "Don't you think it's a little too late to be running now?" As soon as this voice rang out, and a rumbling boom erupted, and a black mountain that was over 1,000 feet in size appeared above the flying carriage in a flash. There was a humanoid figure standing at the summit of the mountain in a stationary manner, and this man was naturally none other than Han Li. He had crossed through space and appeared above the carriage atop his extreme essence-effused mountain, and the two wrong beings were horrified to see him. A ferocious look appeared on one of the wrong being's faces as he rubbed his hands together, upon which a layer of peculiar green flames suddenly erupted over his body. The flames then swept upward and transformed into a fiery worm that was over 100 feet in length. The other wrong being let loose a loud cry, and his body swelled to around twice its original size. His arms also expanded drastically, and he swept his 10 extremely sharp claws up into the air. Countless claw projections appeared out of thin air before sweeping upward, but neither of them were naive enough to think that these attacks would be enough to kill Han Li. They were merely praying that the attacks would buy them enough time for them to escape. Han Li had slain 2 of their companions in the blink of an eye, and their hearts were now devoid of battle intent. All they wanted to do was to flee for their lives. Henley's eyes narrowed slightly as he stomped down on the mountain beneath his feet. Gray light flashed from the extreme essence-effused mountain, and it was sent crashing down from above. All of a sudden, the silver runes on its surface lit up, and it abruptly vanished into thin air. Thus, the fiery worm and claw projections struck nothing but empty air, following which a massive black shadow appeared right above the two wrong beings' heads in a flash. It was none other than the Black Mountain, and it came crashing down with devastating force. However, these two wrong beings were clearly more powerful than their deceased companions. Even in the face of the oncoming, extreme essence-effused mountain, they were still able to just barely abandon the carriage and rush off into opposite directions. The rhomboid flying carriage was dealt an extremely heavy blow by the extreme essence-effused mountain, and it exploded into specks of five-colored spiritual light that faded into nothingness. However, if one were to turn their attention toward the summit of the Black Mountain now, they'd discover that Han Li was nowhere to be seen. In the next instant, one of the feeling wrong beings heard a loud thunderclap erupt overhead, and he was very alarmed as he hurriedly raised his black shield, which surged upward as a dark cloud. At the same time, green flames erupted all over his body, forming a fiery barrier that shielded him within. However, a cold harumph then rang out beside his ears, following which hundreds of streaks of azure sword chi came raining down from a winged humanoid figure who had just appeared. Azure light flashed, and the dark cloud and fiery barrier were almost instantly torn to shreds. The streaks of sword chi then transformed into sword thread that wove themselves into a giant net. A cry of anguish and horror rang out as the wrong being released several more treasures in a blink panic. But all of those treasures were sliced into countless segments by the extraordinarily sharp azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, along with the wrong being's body and nascent soul. The other wrong being shuddered upon hearing his companion's anguished cry, but he continued to flee as quickly as he could without turning his head even once. However, he only managed to fly for several thousand feet before spatial fluctuations suddenly appeared up ahead, following which a golden figure emerged right in his path. The wrong being's expression changed drastically, but he then gritted his teeth, and not only did he not slow down, he accelerated even further as he flipped a hand over to summon a long black blade, while his other hand abruptly expanded in size. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D68C, letter 1D698, letter 1D46. The long blade was slashed through the air in a blue, and a dozen or so black saber projections were unleashed in rapid succession. At the same time, he reached out with his other hand, and a giant green claw abruptly appeared above the golden figure before crashing downward with black chi swirling around its fingertips. Right at this moment, purple runes of different sizes suddenly appeared over the body of the slightly blurry golden figure, immediately following which it became a substantial being with 3 heads and 6 arms amid a flash of golden light. It was none other than the Provenant's golden body. As Hanley set off in pursuit of the other wrong being using his thunderstorm wings, he also released his second nascent soul and golden body to pursue the other wrong being. Black light flashed, and the dozen or so saber projections reached the golden body almost at the exact same time as the giant green claws did. However, the Provenant's golden body displayed no intention of taking evasive measures. Instead, a cold look appeared on one of its faces, and a pair of giant golden blades suddenly appeared in 2 of its hands before it slashed them toward the black saber projections. Meanwhile, 2 of its other hands thrust upward, sending countless golden fist projections hurtling toward the huge green claws in a frenzy. As for its remaining 2 arms, they were brought together in front of the golden body's chest, then split apart to reveal a ball of golden light. 2 of the golden body's heads closed their eyes in unison, following which they began to chant 2 different incantations that overlapped one another. The golden ball of light immediately began to revolve at a rapid rate while expanding to around the size of a human head. Furthermore, it was only accelerating in its rotation, forming a mysterious golden vortex. Bright golden and black light intertwined as the black blade projections struck the golden blades, and they seemed to be evenly matched. Meanwhile, the giant green claws were almost instantly shattered amid a flash of spiritual light, in the face of the devastating barrage of golden fist projections. However, with that short period of delay, the final wrong being's body blurred, and he suddenly vanished into thin air in a flash. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted over 100 feet behind the golden body, and the wrong being reappeared before continuing in its escape. However, right at this moment, one of the Provenant's golden body's heads suddenly lowered itself before uttering the words, "revolving golden light." The golden vortex between two of its hands then suddenly vanished. Spiritual light then flashed several feet behind the wrong being, following which the golden vortex abruptly appeared. As soon as it emerged, it swelled to around 10 feet in size, and loud thunderclaps rang out from within the vortex alongside the sound of Buddhist chants. The fleeing wrong being suddenly felt the air tighten around him, upon which he was completely immobilized. Arg! He let loose a cry of alarm, yet before he had a chance to unleash any other abilities, he was struck by an irresistible suction force from behind. His body was then drawn into the vortex behind him in a flash, and following an anguished howl, an earth-shattering boom rang out. The golden vortex shuddered slightly, following which everything suddenly fell silent. At this moment, the golden body turned around and ceased its chanting before pointing a finger at the massive vortex. The golden vortex flashed as it quickly shrank down to its original size, then disappeared amid a dull thump. All of a sudden, Han Li emerged from the nearby space and glanced at the Provenant's golden body with a pleased look on his face. He swept a sleeve through the air, and the golden body disintegrated into specks of golden light. The second nascent soul then flew toward him as a ball of black chi before also vanishing into his body in a flash. He had released his second nascent soul to possess the golden body, but due to the fact that it still hadn't fortified its cultivation base, it had been unable to use its devilish powers during that battle, and could only use its spiritual sense to control the golden body. In doing so, the second nascent soul wouldn't have to worry about facing backlash from inner demons, but the golden body wouldn't be able to unleash its full power either. Thankfully, after Han Li reached the late spatial tempering stage, he had also cultivated to the last level of his Provenant's true devil arts, so his golden body had become far more powerful than back when he was at the early spatial tempering stage. As such, he was able to use many more powerful abilities that he had been looking forward to for a long time, one of the most powerful and unpredictable of which was the revolving golden light. Even if an ordinary body integration stage being were to be caught off guard and sucked in by this golden light, there was a very good chance that they'd perish in there unless they had some extremely powerful abilities or treasures to protect themselves. As such, even though the second nascent soul was unable to use its devilish powers, it was still able to kill that wrong being with ease. All four of those wrong beings had been slain in virtually the blink of an eye, and Fairy Yue and the elderly man were still hesitating in the distance about whether they should turn around and lend Han Li their assistance when the battle was already over. The four troublesome enemies who had posed such a major threat to them had been eradicated by Han Li with the utmost ease, and both of them were completely rooted to the spot. Their expressions were filled most with astonishment, as well as a hint of unease and the slightest hint of elation. Han Li completely disregarded them and arrived before Quirrell in a flash. Ever since Han Li had appeared, Quirrell had remained rooted obediently to the spot without moving so much as a single inch. The two of them engaged in a brief conversation via voice transmission, following which white light flashed from her body, and she quickly disappeared up Han Li's sleeve. Han Li paused momentarily with a contemplative look on his face, before turning to appraise the woman and elderly man in the distance. The two of them also seemed to have engaged in a brief conversation, and after a brief hesitation, they flew over to Han Li together. Even though they had decided to approach Han Li, they still chose to stop over 100 feet away from him in the end. "Thank you for stepping to save us, fellow Taoist Han. Otherwise, I'm not sure Fairy Yue and I would have been able to escape those wrong beings. Your immense powers truly put the two of us to shame," the elderly man said as he cupped his fist in a grateful salute. A calm expression reappeared in Fairy Yue's eyes as she sighed. Indeed, those wrong beings' movement techniques were quite powerful, and if you hadn't stepped in just in the nick of time, our lives were truly at risk. I'm also extremely grateful to you. So the two of you have already expended much of your magic power. I was wondering why you were unable to shake off those wrong beings. There's no need to thank me. I may not be a heavenly cloud being, but I entered this realm with you two back in Cloud City, so I certainly won't just stand by and watch when you two are in grave danger," Han Li replied with a modest smile. "You have a sharp eye, Brother Han. Indeed, by the time Fairy Yue and I discovered those wrong beings' nefarious plot, we had already expended much of our energy. I won't forget what you did for us, fellow Taoist Han. I'll be sure to thank you for your efforts." The elderly man was quite relieved to see how benevolent Han Li was, and the smile on his face became a little more genuine. Han Li merely smiled and remained silent. All of a sudden, Fairy Yue raised a hand to produce a jade box. This is a nine-flame herb that's already extinct in the spirit realm, and it's a mandatory ingredient for refining several types of spirit pills. It's also one of the reasons why those wrong beings were so intent on hunting us down. We have no way of thanking you for saving our lives, so we can only offer this spirit herb in repayment. She tossed the jade box over to Han Li as she spoke, and a hint of surprise appeared on the elderly man's face upon seeing this, but it quickly disappeared and was replaced by a smile again. Han Li was also rather taken aback by this, and he made a grabbing motion with one hand to draw the jade box into his grasp. He looked down at the jade box to find that it was flashing with red light, and that there were several blue talismans plastered over the box, indicating that it contained something very important. He opened his mouth to expel a burst of azure light, and the talismans on the jade box flashed erratically a few times before flying off on their own. The lid of the box was removed, and a ball of glazed light that seemingly possessed an extremely high level of spiritual nature emerged from within. However, Han Li was already prepared for this, and he certainly wasn't going to allow it to escape. He waved a hand and made a grabbing motion, upon which a burst of immense force instantly immobilized the ball of light. He curled his 5 fingers back, and the ball of light flew directly toward his hand. Fairy Yue's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and she hurriedly cautioned, "Be careful, fellow Taoist Han." "It's all right." Han Li merely smiled in response before shimmering golden spiritual light radiated from his hand, and the glazed ball of light gently settled into his grasp. This was a spirit herb that resembled a flame, and was emitting 9 different types of spiritual light. The spirit herb was only several inches tall, but its 9-colored light was radiating such intense heat that the surrounding air was shimmering and warping violently. However, Han Li didn't seem to be bothered by the scorching heat at all, as he held the spirit herb up to his eyes for closer inspection. A hint of astonishment flashed through the elderly man's eyes upon seeing this, and he chuckled. "Looks like your concerns were unwarranted, Fairy Yue. With Brother Han's astonishing powers, there's no way this spirit herb will be able to harm him." Fairy Yue faltered slightly before a wry smile appeared on her face. Indeed, the spiritual light released by this 9-flame herb can melt metal and stone with ease, but it has no effect on you. Your powers are truly unfathomable, fellow Taoist Han. You two are far too kind. I've merely cultivated some techniques in the past that grant me greater resistance to flames and heat. This 9-flame herb is indeed an extremely rare fire attribute spirit herb, and I do actually have a use for it, so I'll be accepting this gift," Han Li replied with a smile. He then placed the herb back into the jade box and applied a few talismans of his own to its surface. The jade box then vanished amid a flash of spiritual light. A faint smile appeared on Fairy Yue's face upon seeing this. The elderly man was quite reluctant to part with the spirit herb, but he naturally had no objections to this arrangement. Instead, a faint smile also appeared on his face, and he was just about to say something when Han Li abruptly swept a sleeve through the air, sending a faint azure jade vial flying toward each of the two of them. Both of them faltered slightly before reflexively spreading open a hand each, conjuring up bursts of light that swept the jade vials into their hands. "What's this, Brother Han?" A hesitant look appeared on the elderly man's face. Fairy Yue was also looking at Han Li in a surprised manner. "The 9-flame herb is far too precious for me to accept without offering anything in return. Those vials contain pills that can help even 9th-tier upper race beings improve their cultivation base, so it should be helpful for when the two of you decide to break through your bottlenecks," Han Li explained in a nonchalant manner. "What? Pills that enhance even a 9th-tier upper race being's cultivation base?" the elderly man exclaimed before removing the lid of the vial and injecting his spiritual sense into it to inspect its contents. He then took a whiff of the medicinal aroma wafting from the vial, and an ecstatic look appeared on his face. Fairy Yue's expression also changed slightly upon hearing this. Letter 1D453, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 1D452, letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D45A. "These pills will indeed be very useful to me, but you've just saved our lives. How can I take these pills from you?" The elderly man finally calmed down slightly before inspecting the jade vial in his hands in a hesitant manner. It was a simple task for me to step in there. Compared to the nine-flame herb, those pills really aren't all that significant at all. I don't want to benefit unfairly from anyone, so please accept the pills, Han Li said with a faint smile. After a brief moment of contemplation, the elderly man accepted the vial with a smile. In that case, fellow Taoist Yue and I would be more than happy to oblige. Fairy Yue also examined the contents of the vial, before stowing it up her sleeve, as she extended words of gratitude toward Han Li. Following that exchange, the wariness in the elderly man's heart had largely abated, and he looked around before suddenly asking, "Brother Han, are you the only one in this area?" "I was traveling with two other fellow Taoists, but we encountered some danger a while ago and split up," Han Li replied in a truthful manner. "I see, that's quite a pity," the elderly man said as a disappointed look flashed through his eyes, and the same expression was also mirrored on Fairy Yue's face. "You seem to be withholding some information, fellow Taoist Su. Could it be that there's something that you and Fairy Yue want to do that require many helpers?" Han Li asked as he stroked his chin with a hint of a smile on his face. The elderly man turned to the woman with an inquisitive glance upon hearing this, and Fairy Yue hesitated momentarily before making a decision. "Brother Su, that place has already been taken by those wrong beings, and our powers won't be enough to fight them off. However, with Brother Han's unfathomable powers, perhaps we'll have a chance. As such, I think we should tell him about this. If we succeed, we'll take nothing more than a replica of that golden seal text cultivation art." Golden seal text. Han Li's pupils abruptly contracted upon hearing this. "Indeed, we were actually with several other fellow Taoists, but they've all since perished. We discovered that golden seal text cultivation art with those wrong beings in a certain secluded cave." The elderly man paused here momentarily as he heaved a long sigh. Han Li merely appraised him and didn't urge the elderly man to continue. He knew that a detailed elaboration would follow. Sure enough, following a brief pause, the elderly man continued. "However, before we had a chance to break that restriction and record the entire cultivation art, we fell into a trap sprung by the wrong beings. Everyone else perished, while Fairy Yue and I only barely managed to get away using secret techniques. However, in doing so, we had severely depleted our energy and couldn't take any further risks. However, you can certainly give it a try if you're interested in this cultivation art, Brother Han. By the way, this secret cave was extremely obscure, so there might be other treasures in there aside from that golden seal text cultivation art." "Oh, is that so? Where is this secret cave you speak of? Also, it's already been so long. Wouldn't the wrong beings have already secured the treasures in the cave and left?" Han Li asked. "Don't worry, Brother Han. The restrictions in the cave are extremely powerful, and the cultivation art was split up into several segments. Even though so much time has already passed, I'm sure those wrong beings wouldn't have been able to break all of the restrictions and obtain the complete cultivation art, so it's most likely the case that you still have a chance if you go there right away," Fairy Yue explained. "How many wrong beings are there?" Han Li asked. He had to admit that he was a little tempted. "Around 10 or so. Those wrong beings are extremely cunning. Only half of them appeared initially and invited us to explore the secret cave together. However, as soon as we discovered the golden seal text cultivation art, the rest of them also suddenly appeared and turned on us, which is how we were reduced to such a sorry state. You are indeed quite powerful, but you won't be able to take on all of them at once in a direct confrontation. I'd advise that you sneak into the secret cave and strike when an opportunity arises," the elderly man suggested. He had clearly already thought extensively about this matter. Han Li was silent for a moment before suddenly smiling as he asked, "If there are around 10 of them, then it will indeed be wise not to face them head-on. Also, I have another question. How did you two find out about this golden seal text cultivation art? And do you know what this cultivation art is? According to my knowledge, there aren't that many people in all of the heavenly cloud races who can read this text." The elderly man was rather hesitant, but the woman heaved a faint sigh and admitted, "Your wisdom is truly unmatched, Brother Han. Looks like we won't be able to hide anything from you. Truth be told, the seniors of our race told us about this secret cave and the golden seal text cultivation art. Fellow Taoist Su and I are somewhat versed in golden seal text, and we know that the cultivation art is a secret technique known as the spirit refinement technique." Spirit refinement technique. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon hearing this. "According to one of the elders of our race, this technique is extremely profound and can enhance one's spiritual sense by severalfold. Once successfully cultivated, It'll be extremely effective even to breaking through body integration stage bottlenecks in the future. The elderly man also came clean and revealed what he knew. A cultivation art that can enhance one's spiritual sense by severalfold. That's impossible. How could such an extraordinary cultivation art possibly exist? Han Li exclaimed as his expression changed drastically. Fellow Taoist Su is speaking the truth. The elders of our two races were actually made aware of the existence of this secret cave, and the golden seal text cultivation art during one of the previous occasions where the vast glacial realm was open, so they know some details about this divine refinement technique. However, the relevant records were quite ambiguous, and our two races had expended a lot of time and effort before they discovered the location of the secret cave. However, the restriction at the entrance of the secret cave is extremely profound and requires knowledge of golden seal text to be broken, so our two races have been searching arduously for information about golden seal text across the Thunder Continent for many years. Fellow Taoist Su, and I finally learned how to read golden seal text prior to the opening of the vast glacial realm, which is why we attempted to break the restriction to access the cave. Thinking about it now, it's far too much of a coincidence that those wrong beings just so happened to appear at the cave right after we broke the restriction. It's very likely that they've had their eyes on us for a while now, and they must have also been made aware of the existence of this secret cave through alternative avenues, Fairy Yue explained. Han Li contemplated this information for a long while before finally replying. If this spirit refinement technique really is as extraordinary as you proclaim, then I wouldn't mind making a trip to secure it. However, I have no idea how to read golden seal text, so the cultivation method would be useless to me. The elderly man could tell that Han Li was truly interested, and he hurriedly stepped in to seal the deal. That won't be an issue. As long as you can secure the cultivation art and are willing to give myself and Fairy Yue a replica copy each, we would be more than willing to teach you how to read golden seal text so you can use the cultivation art. That will be our repayment to you for taking this risk. Fairy Yue remained silent, so she clearly also approved of this. In that case, looks like I have no choice but to make this trip. Brother Su, give me a copy of your map. Han Li had finally made up his mind. Of course, fellow Taoist Han, I'll make you a copy of the map right away, the elderly man agreed in an elated manner. He flipped a hand over to produce a jade slip, which he placed against his forehead, and faint while light began to shimmer from it. Mere moments later, the jade replicated the map within the elderly man's spiritual sense. The elderly man then handed the jade slip over to Han Li with a wide smile on his face, and said, "Do be careful, Brother Han. Fellow Taoist Yue and I will be awaiting your triumphant return. The two of you can go and rest on that island over there. If I manage to obtain the golden seal text cultivation art, I'll be sure to come back here and reunite with the two of you," Han Li replied as he accepted the jade slip. Azure light then flashed from his body, and he flew away into the distance. After just a few flashes, the azure light vanished into the distant sky. After Han Li had completely disappeared from view, Fairy Yue withdrew her gaze and asked, "What do you think of fellow Taoist Han's chances, Brother Su?" The elderly man contemplated this question for a long while before replying. It's hard to say. If he were a normal upper race being, he would naturally have next to no chance at all. However, he has displayed incredible powers that perhaps even surpass those of a holy race being. If luck is on his side, he should have a roughly 50% chance of success. Don't forget that there's also an extremely powerful wrong being among their ranks, who managed to wound us even after we joined forces against him. 50% is already quite fantastic. To think that our two races dedicated so much time and effort into this, only for those wrong beings to suddenly swoop in and foil our plans. If we don't manage to obtain the spirit refinement technique, you and I will both be subjected to very unsavory fates, Fairy Yue sighed. There's no helping it. Who would have thought that those wrong beings would suddenly turn up and foil our plans? The elderly man also sighed in a resigned manner. A cold expression appeared on Fairy Yue's face. If I had known that those wrong beings were plotting against us from the very beginning, I would have refused to cooperate with them, no matter what. We ended up being used as tools by them and broke many of the restrictions in that cave before they stabbed us in the back. The elderly man shook his head and countered. It wouldn't have made a difference. We had already opened the entrance to that secret cave, and they would have immediately attacked us had we refused to cooperate with them, so it would have happened sooner or later regardless. Furthermore, if the altercation had taken place outside the secret cave, we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of the cave's internal terrain and restrictions, and our chances of escape would have been even slimmer. That's true, we can only hope that fellow Taoist Han will succeed now. Fairy Yue cast her gaze into the distance again. Meanwhile, the elderly man stroked his beard and fell silent as a contemplative look appeared on his face. At this point, Han Li was already tens of thousands of kilometers away, and he was flying through the air at an incredible speed. During his flight, he narrowed his eyes as he placed the jade slip to his forehead, using his spiritual sense to glean the information within. The elderly man had injected a lot of information into the jade slip. Not only was there a map of the secret cave, there were even annotations denoting all of the paths in the cave that they'd explored before. This would undoubtedly save him quite a bit of trouble. Spirit refinement technique A, Han Li murmured to himself. He had already been made fully aware of the benefits of having powerful spiritual sense after cultivating the great development technique. If this secret technique really could multiply the power of his spiritual sense, then not only would it become easier for him to break through future bottlenecks, he would also be able to release more gold-devouring beetles at a time during battle. On top of that, possessing powerful spiritual sense would be greatly beneficial to him in other areas such as formation crafting and pill refinement. As such, he was determined to get his hands on this extraordinary cultivation art. Such a cultivation art could only exist in the true immortal realm. There was no way that he would be able to find something like this in the spirit realm, so he naturally wasn't willing to pass up this opportunity. With that in mind, even the perpetually calm and steadfast Han Li was becoming slightly excited. According to the map, the secret cave was about a day's flight away. It was quite remarkable that the elderly man and Fairy Yue had managed to escape so far even after expending so much energy. As for the wrong beings who were situated in the secret cave, Han Li wasn't all that concerned about them now that he had fully recovered his magic power. As long as there weren't any body integration stage beings among them, he would always be able to escape even if he couldn't defeat all of his enemies. With that in mind, Han Li no longer contemplated the matter any further, and a loud thunderclap suddenly erupted behind him as his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back. He then made a hand seal, and his body shot forth through the air, vanishing into the distance in a flash. In the next instant, he appeared over 1,000 feet away, then disappeared once again. From a distance, it looked as if there were an azure and white thread that was teleporting through the air in a wraith-like manner. Han Li was flying onward at full speed in case those wrong beings broke the restriction and took the golden seal text cultivation art. The journey would have originally taken him a day to complete, but at his current speed, he would be able to get there in less than half a day. In the air above a certain unknown canyon within a mountain range, there was an ordinary-looking white cloud drifting in a casual manner. Hidden within the cloud were two furry wrong beings, and they were discussing something quietly among themselves. "Brother Chuan, it's already been over a day since those four left and they still haven't returned. Could it be that something happened to them?" A wrong being with an azure mark on his forehead said in a concerned manner. What could possibly have happened to them? The two heavenly cloud beings they were pursuing were both completely spent, and we sent 4 people after them. Nothing could possibly go wrong. It's most likely the case that those two heavenly cloud beings burned their latent potential to unleash some kind of secret techniques to delay their inevitable demise. The other crimson-armored wrong being replied in a nonchalant manner. It is indeed true that those two heavenly cloud beings are adept in some remarkable movement techniques. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to escape in the first place. The first wrong being replied with a nod, seemingly having been convinced. It really is quite a surprise that the restriction around the final part of the Golden Seal text cultivation art requires multiple vast glacial badges to break. Looks like we have no choice but to wait for more of our brethren to get here. I wonder if 2 vast glacial badges will even be enough. Perhaps even 3 or 4 will be required. If that's the case, then we'll only be able to obtain an incomplete cultivation art, the armored wrong being sighed. The restriction guarding the final part of the cultivation art is vastly different from all of the previous restrictions, so it's clearly the most important part. If we're unable to secure this final part, then it'll most likely be very difficult for us to successfully cultivate it. It's a pity that none of us know how to read Golden Seal text. Otherwise, we'd be able to read the previous parts to give ourselves an idea of what this cultivation art involves. A forlorn look appeared on the first wrong being's face. Seeing as this is a Golden Seal text cultivation art, we certainly can't just give up on it without doing everything we can. The problem is that even the closest group of our brethren are around 4 or 5 days away, and if we need to gather more vast glacial badges, then we may even have to spend several months here. In that case, our plans to go into seclusion here to try and make a breakthrough would be completely thrown into disarray. The armored wrong being said as his expression darkened slightly. That is indeed rather troublesome. However, if this golden seal text cultivation art really does prove to be an extremely powerful one, then perhaps it'll even be able to benefit our entire race. Compared to that, this is a worthy sacrifice, the first wrong being said in a slow voice as he furrowed his brows slightly. That may be the case, but entering the vast glacial realm is a brilliant opportunity for us to progress to the holy grade. I don't want to pass up this opportunity, the armored wrong being sighed. There's no use talking about that now. We can only hope that the other groups will receive our message and arrive with their vast glacial badges as quickly as possible. Now that I think about it, it's quite extraordinary how all of the races had always thought that vast glacial badges were only keys to access the vast glacial realm. Who would have thought that they would be so useful in breaking certain restrictions in this realm? We have to report this to the elders when we get back so our brethren who enter the vast glacial realm in the future can keep an eye out for such restrictions. Thus, the two wrong beings chatted with one another within the cloud, but their conversation was completely inaudible outside the cloud. The cloud that they were hiding in had been manifested from some kind of profound restriction, and these two were naturally the wrong beings who were keeping lookout. Unbeknownst to the two of them, while they were conversing with one another, there was an indetectable shadow within a white cloud over 1,000 feet above them, and this faint shadow was directly inspecting them. Their cloud restriction seemed to be unable to impede that man's gaze. This shadow was naturally none other than Han Li, who had taken close to half a day to get to this place. The white cloud restriction was indeed quite profound, but Han Li was still able to notice these two wrong beings with his spirit eye ability. Thus, he immediately used his high zenith invisibility talisman to adopt this indistinct form before slowly flying above them. Through the use of his ultra-powerful spiritual sense, he was naturally able to eavesdrop on the conversation between the two wrong beings, and he was quite relieved to hear that they hadn't yet secured the entire cultivation art. His expression changed slightly upon hearing about how multiple vast glacial badges were required to break the final restriction, but a thought then immediately occurred to him, and his expression reverted back to normal. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he took one final glance down below before descending toward the canyon. Even at such close range, the two wrong beings failed to detect his presence, so it would have naturally been an easy task for him to kill them if he wanted to. However, killing them could alert the other wrong beings in the cave to his presence, so he decided against it. After all, he wasn't here to kill these wrong beings. He had no intention of revealing himself prior to seeing the golden seal text cultivation art. With that in mind, Han Li descended several hundred feet into the canyon with blue light flashing through his eyes, and he swept his gaze over the two sides of the canyon. His expression then changed slightly as he focused his gaze on one of the stone faces. The stone face was of a faint yellow color with several cracks on its surface, and it appeared to be extremely mundane. However, from a certain angle, Han Li could see that these cracks formed a star diagram. A hint of elation flashed through his eyes, and he immediately descended directly toward that stone face. Faint spiritual light flashed from the surface of the stone face, and his body passed through it without any impediment, following which he found himself in an extremely wide and spacious passageway. There were fist-sized crystals embedded into the walls of the passageway, all of which were shimmering with faint white light. There was an azure wooden door standing several hundred feet in front of him, and it was slightly ajar. The door was over 200 feet tall with indentations all over its surface, and it was also missing a corner, so it had clearly been forced open by someone through brute force. Han Li narrowed his eyes as he appraised the door, and he could see shimmering golden runes carved around the edge of the giant door. Most of the runes were incomplete, but he was still able to immediately identify that this was golden seal text. There were two wrong beings seated with their legs crossed, and their eyes closed sitting by the sides of the gate, and one of them wore a set of black robes while the other was clothed in white robes. The two wrong beings also had fur all over their bodies, one of which had fur that was pristine white as snow, while the other had inky black fur, creating quite a peculiar contrast to behold. The wrong beings were clearly extremely cautious, and had set up lookout posts at multiple locations. Han Li looked at the gap between the two wrong beings, which was around 30 to 40 feet wide, and his brows furrowed slightly again. He was very confident in his high zenith invisibility talisman, and its concealment abilities had improved significantly now that he had reached the late spatial tempering stage. But he would still be incurring some risk if he were to try and pass through between the two wrong beings. He wasn't fully confident in his ability to sneak past these two wrong beings without alerting them. However, Hai Li didn't hesitate for too long before he took a deep breath and drifted silently toward the giant wooden door. He had already made it to this place, so he couldn't just turn back. If worse came to worst, then he would just have to kill these two and force his way in. That naturally wouldn't be the wisest strategy, but it was the only course of action that was available to him. There were many wrong beings in this place, but he could whittle them down by adopting guerrilla warfare tactics. His only concern was that the wrong beings could destroy the golden seal text in the cave in a fit of desperation. The damage would be irreparable, and he would have come all this way for nothing. After all, with true immortal realm secret technique like this one, even a few missing golden seal text runes would make it impossible for him to cultivate the spirit refinement technique. Of course, this was rather unlikely to happen. If he were to strike quickly enough and even resorted to using his profound heavenly blade segment and gold-devouring beetles, he was confident that he would be able to kill the wrong beings in the cave before they had a chance to do anything. Thus, Han Li instantly made up his mind before flying toward the two wrong beings. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. Han Li reached the area right between the two wrong beings in the blink of an eye, and right at this moment, the wrong being who was covered in black fur suddenly opened his eyes. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing this, and he immediately stopped on the spot. The white-furred wrong being naturally sensed his companion's reaction, and he also opened his eyes before looking around in a perplexed manner. "Did you sense something?" The black-furred wrong being didn't reply as he released his spiritual sense, which passed over Han Li's body and swept through the entire passageway up ahead before sweeping backward. "Looks like it was just my imagination. I've been struggling to enter a calm state of mind before I meditate lately, and I don't know why," the black-furred wrong being said. "I see. That's not really strange. I've also been in the same situation ever since we entered the vast glacial realm. It's most likely because we've been too tense here in this foreign realm," the white-furred wrong being said with a smile. "Perhaps so," the black-furred wrong being said with his brows furrowed slightly in contemplation. However, right in the next instant, he abruptly swept a sleeve through the air, sending a burst of silver threads hurtling forth, and the silver threads encompassed the entire passageway up ahead. Han Li's pupils abruptly contracted upon seeing this, but he stood still on the spot and allowed the silver threads to strike him. A peculiar scene then ensued. The silver threads merely passed through Han Li's body in a flash, before striking the ground and revealing themselves to be a series of hair-thin silver needles that were several inches in length each. The two wrong beings appraised the empty passageway in an expressionless manner. "Looks like I really have been too tense of late," the black-furred wrong being said as his lips twitched slightly. "Hee, we can rest easy now after that," the white-furred wrong being said with a smile, seemingly completely unperturbed by his companion's abrupt actions. The black-furred wrong being nodded before closing his eyes, and the white-furred wrong being did the same after sweeping his gaze through the passageway up ahead one final time. Thus, Han Li passed silently between them, and neither of them opened their eyes as Han Li made his way through the massive azure door. Only then did he truly heave a sigh of relief. It was very fortunate that the wrong being had unleashed a physical attack that was ineffective against his current body. If he had used a magic attack instead, even the simplest of fireballs would have forced him to reveal himself. After passing through the azure door, Han Li traversed through the passageway before disappearing around a corner. This secret cave truly was an architectural masterpiece. There were countless passageways of different sizes that fanned out like a cobweb, and most of these passageways had been formed naturally. As such, this place was like a befuddling maze to those exploring it for the first time. Thankfully, Han Li had the map of the secret cave that the elderly man had given him, so he knew exactly what route to take. After a short while, he finally arrived before a natural cave. This was a cave that was over 300 feet in size, with a faint white stone wall on one side. There were rows of golden runes carved over the stone wall, all of which were shimmering with mysterious spiritual light. Han Li's heart abruptly jolted upon seeing this, and he swept his gaze through the cave to discover that there was a wrong being wearing a conical bamboo hat sitting in front of the stone face. He wore a contemplative look on his face, and he seemed to be inspecting the text on the stone wall. This was rather troublesome to Han Li. The text on the stone wall was undoubtedly the objective for his trip, but if he wanted to use a secret technique to replicate this text, there was no way for him not to alert this wrong being. Han Li stood silently at the entrance of the cave, with his brows tightly furrowed in contemplation. Meanwhile, the wrong being was appraising the stone wall intently, while making a hand gesture from time to time, seemingly completely immersed in attempting to decipher the text on the wall. Han Li finally made a decision upon seeing this. He slowly drifted toward this wrong being, and in the blink of an eye, he was only 40 to 50 feet away and continued to close in. However, the wrong being was still completely oblivious to his presence, clearly immersed in the text on the wall. Han Li was quite elated to see this, and when he was less than 20 feet away from this wrong being, he finally sprang into action. Golden light flashed from his body, and he abruptly revealed himself before raising a hand to launch a small black mountain that was enshrouded within gray light. At the same time, his golden body appeared behind him in a flash, and all 6 of its golden arms were thrust toward the wrong being in unison. The wrong being was instantly jerked out of his immersive state, and green light flashed from his body as he attempted to unleash some kind of secret technique to flee the scene. However, almost in the exact same instant, golden light abruptly flashed from the 6 golden hands, and a burst of invisible enormous force erupted from each of them. The wrong being felt the air tighten around him, and he was completely immobilized, unable to move so much as a single finger. Even the circulation of magic power within his body had become extremely sluggish. Meanwhile, the small black mountain expanded above his head before releasing a vast expanse of gray light, as well as countless silver runes. An expression of shock and fury appeared on the wrong being's face, and he immediately made a decision, taking a deep breath before letting loose a long cry. He was disregarding his own safety to alert all of his other brethren in the cave. However, the sound waves were unable to escape beyond the gray light around him, and his heart immediately sank upon seeing this. Before he had a chance to do anything else, a golden thread suddenly erupted from each of the 6 golden palms, and the threads quickly bound him into a tight cocoon. At the same time, the silver runes erupting from the extreme essence-effused mountain formed a shimmering silver light formation that descended from above. A dull thump rang out, and the light formation vanished along with the wrong being, as if he had never even been here in the first place. If someone were to unleash a powerful eye ability that allowed them to see into the extreme essence-effused mountain, they discover that the wrong being was lying unconscious in the belly of the mountain. Not only had his body been bound tightly by golden threads, a layer of silver runes had been plastered all over the nascent soul within his body, and it had also been forced into an unconscious state. From the instant that Han Li revealed himself to the moment that the wrong being was drawn into the extreme essence-effused mountain, only the span of a few breaths had passed. Both the golden body and extreme essence-effused mountain had attacked in a completely silent manner, and also had their spiritual pressure fluctuations minimized to its lowest possible point. As such, as long as there wasn't a third person in the cave, no one would be able to discover that a being at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage had just been captured alive. Han Li heaved a sigh of relief upon successfully pacifying this wrong being. It was a good thing that he was the only wrong being here, and his attention was entirely focused on the golden seal text on the wall. Otherwise, it definitely wouldn't have been so easy for him to succeed. If those 2 wrong beings outside had detected his presence, there was no way that he would have been able to capture them alive. He would have been forced to kill them. As long as this wrong being wasn't killed, his companions most likely wouldn't be able to detect that anything was amiss. This spatial ability to draw in beings was something that the divine essence-effused mountain had attained after being refined into the extreme essence-effused mountain. If he were to completely refine all 5 extreme mountains, this ability would become unfathomably powerful, and the mountain would even be able to draw in entire seas. Even though he currently only had 1 extreme mountain, it was still very powerful, and it would virtually be impossible for that wrong being to escape. Han Li didn't hesitate any longer after this, stowing away the golden body and black mountain before immediately sweeping a sleeve through the air. A black ring flew out from within, before releasing a burst of azure light that swept downward. Spiritual light flashed, and faint golden light emanated from the stone wall. However, it remained completely stationary and refused to be drawn into the storage bracelet. Hanli heaved a faint sigh, but he wasn't all that surprised to see this. If it were that easy to take this item, then it wouldn't have remained here for so long. He had only attempted to draw into the storage bracelet just in case it worked. White light flashed, and a palm-sized jade slip sprang out of the black bracelet before hovering in front of the stone wall. He made a hand seal before quickly pointing a finger at the jade slip, and it immediately released a burst of silver light that encompassed the entire stone wall. In the next instant, the golden runes on the stone wall warped and twisted, and it was as if they had sprung to life within the silver light. Immediately thereafter, balls of golden light flew out of the stone wall before vanishing into the jade slip. Moments later, all of the golden balls of light had disappeared into the jade slip, and Hanli abruptly withdrew his hand seal. Silver light immediately flashed from the jade slip, and it fell into his grasp as a ball of white light. Hanli held the jade slip and injected his spiritual sense into it, upon which a faint smile appeared on his face. The contents of the jade slip were indeed identical to the golden runes on the stone wall. He carefully stowed away the storage bracelet and the jade slip before flipping a hand over to reveal a purple talisman, which he adhered to his own body again. Purple light flashed, and Hanli's body entered an insubstantial state again. Thus, Hanli continued to traverse through the secret cave and found 3 more stone walls with golden seal text inscribed upon them. Only one of those stone walls is being guarded by a wrong being, while the other 2 were left unguarded. This made Hanli's job a lot easier, and he snuck up on the other wrong being before drawing him into the extreme essence-effused mountain as well. Thus, 3 more sections of the cultivation art were replicated into the same jade slip, and according to the annotations on the map that had been given to him by the elderly man, there was only one part of the cultivation art left. However, Hanli became even more cautious here rather than allowing himself to grow complacent. He hadn't encountered many wrong beings yet, so they were most likely all gathered in the final cave. According to the information that he'd eavesdropped earlier, only the restriction guarding the final part of the cultivation art was yet to be broken, so it was no wonder that everyone was gathered there. With that in mind, Hanli found himself at a crossroads. This was an area that he had to pass through en route to that final cave. Hanli looked around as he stroked his chin, then suddenly raised a hand, and over 100 formation flags surged out of his sleeve in a frenzy. This was his most powerful set of formation tools, and it was capable of even trapping spatial tempering stage being for a while. On top of that, he also brought out one of his 9 palaces' heavenly talismans, and a massive palatial projection appeared for an instant before vanishing above the formation. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D696. The materials required to refine this talisman were extremely rare, but he managed to purchase some in Cloud City and was thus able to refine 2 more of those talismans. Thus, even if the wrong beings outside were alerted to what was happening in the cave, they would be trapped by these 2 restrictions for a while before they could reach Hanli. After doing all of this, Hanli nodded with a pleased look on his face before laying a hand on top of his own head, upon which golden light flashed, and the golden body appeared behind him. He then opened his mouth to expel a ball of black chi that vanished into the golden body. Go, Hanli instructed without any hesitation. A ferocious look appeared on one of the golden body's faces, and it suddenly vanished into thin air in a wraith-like manner. Hanli then flicked his fingers to send a ball of silver flames and a pair of silver talismans flying out of his sleeves. They transformed into a silver fire raven and 2 faint silver figures, respectively, then also vanished into the ground in front of him. After that, Hanli made a hand seal to summon a white figure, which transformed into a woman in white that also disappeared into the nearby space. Finally, he brought out his high zenith invisibility talisman again, and silver runes flashed as he faded into nothingness. His insubstantial body quickly flew toward a certain passageway in a completely expressionless manner, and after taking several turns, a white stone cave finally appeared up ahead. There were 4 faint auras emanating from within the cave, and Hanli narrowed his eyes as he continued to drift forward. Moments later, he reached the entrance to the cave and swept his gaze through its interior. This cave was over 1,000 feet in size, which was far larger than all of the other caves, and it resembled a small plaza. At the center of the plaza was a semi-spherical silver light barrier, within which was another stone wall that had golden seal text inscribed on its surface. There was a wrong being seated with their legs crossed at each corner of the plaza, and some of them had their heads lowered in contemplation, while others were staring intently at the silver light barrier. However, what drew Han Li's attention the most was a tall and broad wrong being with his eyes closed, and his hands resting on his knees. This wrong being wore a set of ordinary gray robes, but there was a huge blade strapped to his back. The entire blade was wrapped in yellow beast hide, with only its thick and long black handle, symbol 361 degrees, symbol 35C, turn glottal stop, symbol 361 degrees, revealed. The entire blade seemed to be significantly taller than even the wrong being himself, and it was extremely eye-catching. What particularly caught Han Li's attention was the virtually substantial layer of faint crimson light emanating from the wrong being's body. This was an extremely dense layer of baleful qi. The other three wrong beings consisted of a young man in a suit of leather armor, as well as an old man and an old woman. These four wrong beings also had fur all over their bodies like their brethren, but they possessed heads that were identical to those of normal humans. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he immediately drifted toward the tall and broad man without any hesitation. It was quite clear that this wrong being was far more powerful than the other three, so he was going to take this man by surprise and kill him quickly before taking on the other three less troublesome opponents. His insubstantial body drifted silently through the air, and he was soon less than 200 feet away from his target. The wrong being continued to sit in a stationary manner, completely oblivious to the fact that a major threat was approaching. Han Li's magic power was already beginning to circulate within his body, yet right at this moment, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. When Han Li was only just over 100 feet away from the wrong being, and the giant blade on his back suddenly let loose a faint ringing sound. The sound wasn't very loud, but this place was completely silent, so it immediately alerted everyone. The three other wrong beings' hearts jolted as they turned toward their companion in unison. The tall and broad man also abruptly opened his eyes, and piercing yellow light flashed through his pupils as his hand shot forth like lightning before making a grabbing motion. In the next instant, the giant blade somehow ended up in his grasp, and the layer of beast hide was torn into shreds. The giant blade then transformed into a gust of fierce black wind that surged forward in a frenzy. Loud rumbling booms rang out incessantly from within the black wind, and the outlines of a ferocious beast could be made out within the gust of wind. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. He had encountered an extremely rare treasure that could alert its owner to danger, and it was most likely a treasure on the chaotic myriad spirit roll. Golden light flashed from his body, and he raised both of his arms at once. A silver ruler abruptly appeared in one of his hands, and he swung it toward the oncoming gust of black wind. Countless ruler projections erupted forth in a frenzy, before converging to form a massive ruler projection amid a flash of silver light. An earth-shattering boom erupted as silver light and black wind exploded in unison. The silver ruler clashed with the giant blade, and the runes on their surfaces flashed violently as astonishing spiritual pressure was released. An insistent ringing sound could be heard, and the two treasures appeared to be evenly matched. Meanwhile, Han Li gently thrust his other palm into the air, and a small black mountain emerged before vanishing into thin air. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted above the wrong being's head, and a black mountain that was around 10 feet tall came crashing down from above. A faint cry of surprise rang out as a slightly alarmed look finally appeared on the wrong being's face, but he then quickly put on a disdainful sneer as he made a hand seal, upon which a layer of dense crimson baleful qi surfaced over his body. The baleful qi erupted into the heavens before forming a huge crimson hand that thrust directly up toward the black mountain. A dull thump rang out as the hand came into contact with the underside of the mountain, and the former immediately began to display signs of strain. It was quite clear that the extreme essence-effused mountain was far heavier than the wrong being had expected. His expression changed slightly as he abruptly rose to his feet, then immediately launched a powerful punch upward. A pillar of crimson light erupted from his fist before vanishing into the huge crimson hand in order to bolster it. Crimson light immediately swirled around the massive hand as it swelled to several times its original size, and a crimson lotus flower appeared on each of its 5 fingertips. The 5 lotus flowers revolved on the spot, releasing countless runes that worked together with the huge hand, and their combined powers really did manage to keep the Black Mountain at bay. Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and a loud thunderclap rang out behind him as a pair of translucent wings surfaced on his back. He flapped his wings, and another thunderclap rang out as he vanished on the spot. The wrong being's pupils contracted upon seeing this, and he immediately opened his mouth to blast forth a burst of golden light, which disappeared in a flash around 10 feet in front of the wrong being. A dull explosion rang out, and Han Li stumbled out of thin air. There were 5 colored flames burning around his pristine white hand, which was currently locked tightly around a small golden snake with wings on its back. The snake was flicking its forked tongue and writhing incessantly, attempting to break free from, but Han Li merely harumphed coldly as the 5 colored flames increased drastically in brightness. A horrified look flashed through the golden snake's eyes, and in the next instant, a layer of ice abruptly appeared over its body, turning it into a 5-colored ice statue. Following his drastic cultivation base improvement, his 5-colored glacial flames had naturally also become vastly more powerful than before. He rubbed his hands together without any hesitation, releasing arcs of golden lightning from his palms amid a loud thunderclap. The ice statue was instantly shattered as a result, and the golden snake disintegrated into specks of spiritual light. A shocked and enraged look appeared on the wrong being's face. This void-vanquishing spirit was something that he had nurtured for many years, and not only did it possess a powerful innate ability to puncture through space, its body was also extremely resolute, making it very difficult for treasures to harm it. Never did he think that it would be captured and destroyed so easily by this opponent. A thunderous roar of fury rang out as the wrong being made a grabbing motion with one hand, upon which a round bowl suddenly appeared in his grasp. The surface of the bowl was riddled with intricate symbols and radiating faint crimson light, and its edge was extremely sharp. He flicked his wrist to send the bowl flying through the air, and it transformed into countless crimson blades that hurtled directly toward Han Li. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face at the sight of these crimson blades, and he made a hand seal rather than taking any evasive measures. Black chi swirled all over his body, and a suit of black armor appeared. As soon as the crimson light reached within 10 feet of Han Li, it was stopped coldly in its tracks by the layers of black runes being released by the suit of armor. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to flap his wings, upon which he vanished again as an azure and white arc of lightning. The wrong being wore a look of thunderous rage on his face as crimson baleful chi erupted all around him, before instantly forming a massive crimson lotus flower that encapsulated his entire body. At this point, he had already realized that his opponent was far from an ordinary spatial tempering stage being, and he turned to his companions with a slightly bewildered expression, wondering why they hadn't stepped in to assist him yet. As a result, he was greeted by the sight of the 3 other wrong beings battling a white figure and 2 faint silver figures that had suddenly appeared. All 3 of the wrong beings were clearly dominating their opponents, but they were still unable to free themselves from their battles anytime soon. The white and silver figures were naturally none other than Han Li's sentient puppet, as well as shadow puppets manifested by 2 of his armor origin talismans. Following Han Li's progression to the late spatial tempering stage, the shadow puppets manifested by the talismans had also become far more powerful than before, and that was why they were able to hold off 2 of the late spatial tempering stage wrong beings. Otherwise, the shadow puppets of the past would have most likely been destroyed by such powerful opponents already. As for Dal, it was wielding a blue fan from which balls of blue light were being released in a relentless barrage. Meanwhile, its other hand was flicking threads of glacial chi incessantly toward the young man, rendering him unable to assist the wrong being who had been attacked by Han Li. The wrong being who was facing Han Li was quite surprised by this turn of events, yet before he had a chance to think of anything else, spatial fluctuations erupted above his head, and Han Li suddenly appeared above the small black mountain before gently stomping a foot down onto it. The mountain expanded drastically amid a flash of gray light, swelling to over 100 feet in size before crushing the huge crimson hand down below amid a resounding boom. The black mountain then came crashing down from above, and the wrong being's expression changed slightly as he immediately flipped his hand over. In doing so, he summoned a small silver axe that was several inches in length amid a flash of spiritual light, then hurled the axe upward. A dull thump rang out as a giant axe that was several tens of feet in size emerged from within the flashing silver light, before crashing down toward the black mountain like lightning. Han Li's pupils contracted as he made a hand seal, and the extreme essence-effused mountain blurred before abruptly vanishing. Thus, the giant axe struck nothing but empty air, immediately following which Han Li and the black mountain reappeared above the wrong being's head before plummeting downward without any hesitation. The wrong being's expression changed drastically, and it was quite clear that he hadn't anticipated that such a huge mountain could weave in and out of space instantaneously. In this dire situation, he let loose a loud roar, and the crimson lotus flower petals around him converged to form a dense crimson light barrier that was 7 layers thick. At the same time, the wrong being laid a hand onto the top of his own head, and a burst of crimson baleful chi erupted out of his head before transforming into a ferocious giant crimson tiger that pounced violently toward the underside of the mountain. The black mountain continued to descend amid a burst of dull rumbling, and the giant tiger was destroyed almost as soon as the two clashed with one another. The mountain then crashed down onto the crimson light barrier, and a string of cracking noises rang out in quick succession from the latter. 5 layers of the light barrier were shattered in a flash, and the 6th layer only just barely managed to arrest the extreme essence-effused mountain's downward momentum, but it was quivering violently, clearly struggling against the mountain's enormous weight. A ferocious look appeared on the wrong being's face as he made a grabbing motion toward the giant axe up above. The huge silver axe swiveled around before crashing downward as a thick pillar of lightning, hurtling directly toward Han Li. Han Li's eyelids twitched slightly, but he made no effort to take evasive measures. All of a sudden, a head-sized ball of silver flames emerged out of the nearby space, then struck the bolt of lightning formed by the giant axe in a flash with unerring accuracy. The two clashed amid a loud boom, and the giant axe was immediately forced back into its original form before being inundated by scorching silver flames. The wrong being's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and before he had a chance to react, the space behind him suddenly twisted and warped. A huge golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms then emerged out of thin air, and there was a ball of golden light revolving incessantly over each of its 6 palms. This was none other than Han Li's Provenance golden body. As soon as it appeared, the 6 arms converged in front of the golden body's chest, and the 6 balls of light instantly combined as one to form a head-sized golden vortex. At the same time, 2 of the golden body's heads closed their eyes in unison, before chanting 2 different types of incantations that overlapped with one another. Loud thunderclaps rang out from within the vortex alongside faint Buddhist chants, and the vortex suddenly expanded to around 10 feet in size. The wrong being had naturally noticed the golden body at this point, and his expression changed drastically as he hurriedly swept a sleeve behind him. A vast expanse of translucent crimson threads immediately surfaced behind him before hurtling toward the golden body in unison, creating quite a devastating barrage of attacks. However, all of the crimson threads merely vanished one after another as they struck the golden body, while the golden body itself remained completely unscathed. Right at this moment, a burst of enormous force erupted from within the golden vortex, and the wrong being felt the air tighten around him, upon which he was completely immobilized. Arg! A chill ran down the wrong being's spine, and he tried to draw back the giant blade, which was still engaged in a fierce battle against the silver ruler. However, Han Li gave a cold harumph in response, and the silver ruler suddenly released countless identical projections that surged toward the giant blade as balls of silver light. The giant blade was indeed extremely powerful, but it was unable to escape from such a ferocious barrage of attacks in a short time. A burst of immense irresistible force erupted behind the wrong being, and he was drawn into the giant vortex behind him like a speeding arrow. A blood-curdling cry rang out, following by an earth-shattering boom, and the golden vortex shuddered slightly before the aura of the wrong being completely disappeared. The golden body ceased its chanting before pointing a finger at the huge vortex, and spiritual light flashed as the vortex rapidly shrank down to its original size, then faded into nothingness in a flash. At this moment, the giant black blade, which had lost its owner, let loose an anguished wail as it suddenly transformed into a black worm. The black worm blasted forth clouds of black chi in a frenzied manner, tearing a hole through the barrage of silver ruler projections before attempting to flee the scene. However, Han Li seemed to have anticipated this well in advance, and he flapped his wings amid a loud thunderclap before he instantly appeared above the black blade in a wraith-like manner. He opened his mouth to expel a ball of azure light, within which was a miniature azure cauldron. Li quickly pointed a finger at the small cauldron, and its lid flew off on its own before a loud buzzing sound rang out from within. Countless azure threads erupted forth before tightly binding the black worm, following which Li immediately patted the small cauldron. A crisp clang rang out, and the azure threads abruptly tightened around the black worm, forcing it back into its giant blade form amid a flash of brilliant azure light. Li made a hand seal, and the azure threads drew the huge blade into the cauldron, which reverted back into a ball of azure light. Li swept a sleeve toward the ball of azure light, and it disappeared in a flash. Only then did he cast his gaze elsewhere to inspect the rest of the battlefield. The giant silver axe had already been melted into a ball of silver liquid by the spirit engulfing heavenly flames, and it was close to being fully devoured by the flames. As for the other three wrong beings, they had naturally already noticed that their companion had been killed by Li. All three of them were horrified by this development, and they abandoned their opponents almost at the exact same time before fleeing the scene as streaks of light. Their deceased companion was the most powerful one among them, and the fact that Li had killed him in such a short time meant that he was definitely far too powerful for the three of them to oppose. They would only have a chance if they could be reunited with all of their other companions. However, Li certainly wasn't about to let them escape. A cold light flashed through his eyes, and he flapped his wings before vanishing into thin air as an azure and white thread of light. The golden body stepped forward and abruptly disappeared on the spot, while the two shadow puppets and doll also set off in hot pursuit. Moments later, the young man's anguished wail rang out from outside the cave, and his aura was the first to vanish. Immediately thereafter, a string of explosions and roars of fury rang out, and not long after that, the elderly man and woman were also felled amid blood-curdling cries. Everything fell silent thereafter. After around 10 minutes had passed, an earth-shattering boom erupted from a certain crossroads far away from the cave, and the sounds of battle resumed. After an indeterminate period of time, everything fell silent again. Azure light flashed outside the cave, and Li strode in an expressionless manner before immediately directing his gaze toward the silver light barrier in the cave. He had slain those three wrong beings with his golden body and puppets, then immediately rushed over to the crossroads where he'd set up his formation. As expected, the other four wrong beings had been trapped within the 9 palaces, heavenly talisman, and the restriction, and Li immediately engaged them in battle. The outcome of that battle was rather unexpected to him. He was able to kill 3 of the wrong beings in quick succession, but the final black-furred wrong being suddenly unleashed a peculiar secret technique that he had never seen before, self-detonating his physical body to break through the restriction before escaping as a dozen or so streaks of crimson light. Even though most of the streaks of crimson light were hunted down by Li, there were 2 that had escaped too far even for his spiritual sense and spirit eyes to track, so he could only let them go. However, even though that wrong being had survived, he was nothing more than just 2 soul fragments without a physical body, so it was most likely the case that he would simply be hunted down as prey by some powerful beast in this realm. Li had no intention of staying here any longer than he had to. All he wanted to do now was to break this final restriction to obtain the final part of the cultivation arc, then immediately depart from this place. However, even the dozen or so wrong beings had been stumped by this restriction, so he wasn't very sure whether he would be able to break it. Li narrowed his eyes, and blue light flashed through his pupils as he slowly made his way over to the light barrier. This restriction really did appear to be quite special. Its surface seemed to be shimmering with silver light, yet upon closer inspection, there were actually runes of all colors drifting within the light barrier. Furthermore, the barrier itself was also very dense, yet it remained completely transparent. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41E, letter 1D430, letter 1D68T, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D55E. However, just because the wrong beings were unable to forcibly break this restriction didn't mean that he would be incapable of such a feat as well. His brows furrowed slightly, and he suddenly flicked a finger to send a streak of azure sword chi flying out of his sleeve, which then struck the light barrier. The sword chi was instantly repelled with a crisp clang, while the light barrier remained completely unscathed. Li wasn't all that surprised to see this, and he immediately opened his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames. The spirit engulfing heavenly flames exploded against the surface of the light barrier amid a dull thump, but it couldn't do anything either. He then summoned his silver ruler and unleashed countless ruler projections that crashed down onto the light barrier. Thus, he tried many types of treasures and abilities in succession, but none of them could even put a scratch on the silver light barrier. After an extended period of contemplation, he even made the decision to have his golden body use the profound heavenly blade segment again. But the outcome of that made him completely give up on attempting to break this formation through brute force. As expected, the silver light barrier was unable to withstand the power of laws unleashed by the profound heavenly treasure. But in the instant that cracks began to appear on its surface, cracks also appeared on the stone wall shielded within it. Han Li was immediately given a massive fright by this, and he hurriedly withdrew the attack from the profound heavenly blade segment, suffering backlash that almost damaged his true essence as a result. As such, he also cast aside the plan to use gold-devouring beetles on the light barrier, and sat down with his legs crossed to inspect the light barrier and the runes flashing on its surface. Thankfully, Han Li was quite adept in the art of formations himself, and he had also overheard the two wrong beings outside mention vast glacial badges. As such, after pondering the situation for a day and a night in the cave, he finally developed an inkling for how to break this restriction. An elated peal of laughter escaped from Han Li's mouth, and he rose to his feet before sweeping a sleeve through the air to expel a ball of golden and silver light. The ball of light transformed into an antiquated badge that was around half a foot in length before hovering in midair in a stationary manner. Han Li flicked his 10 fingers in quick succession, launching incantation seals of different colors toward the light barrier. Letter 1D557, letter 1D69B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D68E, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D55E. With each incantation seal that vanished into the barrier, the silver light would flash violently, and moments later, the light barrier began to resemble a pot of boiling water. Countless runes appeared, then began to revolve in a rhythmic and orderly manner while Han Li continued to cast incantation seals as he appraised the barrier with an unblinking gaze. All of a sudden, he let loose a low cry before raising a sleeve, and several tens of formation flags erupted forth. The flags circled around in the air before forming a strange formation above the light barrier. All of the formation flags began to emit a buzzing sound, and they swayed gently as they released spiritual light of different colors. Han Li let loose another low cry before pointing a finger into the air, and the bright spiritual light radiating from the formation flags intertwined, forming an extremely complex light formation that slowly revolved in midair. Go! Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he pointed a finger at the vast glacial badge, and it shuddered before vanishing into a certain part of the light formation as a streak of golden and silver light. In the next instant, a peculiar aura was released by the light formation, following which bursts of ringing sounds rang out. A golden and silver pillar of light erupted from the center of the light formation before striking the silver light barrier, and the previously immovable light barrier began to melt away like snow under the scorching sun amid a sizzling sound. However, moments later, the runes around the light barrier surged violently toward the pillar of light, ceasing the melting process and gradually thickening the light barrier again. As opposed to being frustrated by this, an elated look appeared on Han Li's face. He swept a hand over his storage bracelet, and 2 more balls of golden and silver light flew through the air before revealing themselves to be 2 more vast glacial badges. One of them was naturally the one that he had kept for himself, while the other one was obtained after searching the body of the wrong beings that had been drawn into his extreme essence-effused mountain. Much to Han Li's surprise, the one who had refined the vast glacial badge in this group wasn't the giant blade-wielding wrong being, who was clearly the most powerful one among them. After Han Li plundered everything from the storage bracelets of the 2 wrong beings detained in his extreme essence-effused mountain, he used his spirit-engulfing heavenly flames to burn them into ashes. After these 2 vast glacial badges appeared, they were flicked by Han Li and also shuddered before disappearing into the light formation above the silver barrier. The light formation tremored violently as a loud rumbling noise rang out, following which the golden and silver pillar of light it was releasing became thrice as thick as before. The silver light barrier was initially just barely able to hold its own, but in the face of such enormous power, all of the runes swirling around it churned and began to melt away again. Around 10 minutes later, An earth-shattering boom erupted right before Han Li's expectant eyes, and the silver light barrier finally crumbled, flashing a few times before vanishing into nothingness. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he made a hand seal before pointing a finger at the light formation up above. A dull thud rang out, and the light formation also vanished before reverting back into a series of formation flags and 3 badges. Han Li then swept a sleeve through the air to expel a burst of azure light, which instantly swept up the formation flags and badges. After that, he turned toward the golden text on the stone wall, which had become significantly clearer, and even with his steadfast nature, he couldn't help but be momentarily overcome by excitement. After an indeterminate period of time, a streak of azure light flew out of the canyon before circling around in the air. The azure streak of light then suddenly released a black mountain, which expanded to the same size as a real mountain in the blink of an eye before crashing down toward the valley. Several earth-shattering booms rang out in succession, and following a fierce barrage of powerful blows from the giant black mountain, the entire canyon caved in by several hundred feet, and it had virtually been flattened into nothingness. The azure light faded, and Han Li was revealed up above. He looked down with an indifferent expression at the flattened canyon before making a grabbing motion downward in a nonchalant manner. The giant mountain emitted a rumbling noise before quickly shrinking back down, then vanishing up Han Li's sleeve as a streak of black light. Azure light then reappeared around Han Li's body as he continued into the distance. A day later, an elderly man and a young woman were seated on a lush mountain situated on an unknown island, and both of them had their eyes closed in silent meditation. The two wore solemn expressions, and one of them had spiritual light flashing incessantly from his body, while the other had wisps of white chi quickly dancing around her. All of a sudden, the woman's expression stirred slightly, and the white chi around her dissipated. Almost at the exact same moment, the spiritual light around the elderly man's body faded as he also opened his eyes with a slightly surprised expression. "Someone seems to be coming this way. Could it be fellow Taoist Han?" the woman murmured in a hesitant manner. "Perhaps, but it's only been less than 2 days since fellow Taoist Han departed. Surely it wouldn't be that easy for him to secure the cultivation art no matter how powerful he is. After all, there were over 10 wrong beings of the same caliber as us over there," the elderly man said in an incredulous manner. "I'm not sure if that's the case, but we'll soon know whether it's fellow Taoist Han or not." Fairy Yue raised a hand to toss out a white handkerchief, which formed a white light barrier over her body. She then vanished along with the light barrier in the blink of an eye. The elderly man also nodded before flipping a hand over to produce an azure flag, which he waved through the air, upon which he also disappeared amid a flash of azure light. Thus, it became as if no one had ever been on this mountain in the first place. Moments later, spiritual light flashed in the distance, and a streak of azure light appeared, hurling directly toward the island. The azure light circled around before landing on the lush mountain, and the light then receded to reveal Han Li. He looked around with blue light flashing through his eyes, upon which a smile appeared on his face. "Come on out, fellow Taoists. I've already secured the cultivation art. It really is Brother Han. Congratulations, fellow Taoist Han." Two cries of surprise and elation rang out almost in unison, following which azure and white light flashed, and the elderly man and Fairy Yue reappeared. Both of them wore ecstatic expressions, and Fairy Yue's voice trembled slightly with disbelief as she asked, "Brother Han, have you really secured the entire spirit refinement technique?" I wouldn't lie about that. If you don't believe me, you can take a look for yourself." Han Li smiled as he raised a hand, and an azure jade slip shot forth. Fairy Yue faltered slightly upon seeing this, and she reflexively raised a hand to catch the jade slip, upon which a hesitant look appeared on her face. She was truly quite surprised that Han Li was willing to give her the cultivation art so easily. The elderly man beside her was also rather taken aback, but Han Li merely smiled and disregarded their surprised expressions, making no effort to explain himself. Fairy Yue collected herself before sweeping her spiritual sense over the jade slip to verify that there weren't any restrictions placed on it. "All right, then I'll be taking a look." Her expression reverted back to normal as she pressed the jade slip against her forehead and began to carefully inspect its contents. She claimed to be able to read golden seal texts, and it seemed that her claims were true. Moments later, a hint of contemplation and elation appeared on her face, but after about 10 minutes, her expression had become a lot more solemn and even a little bewildered. The elderly man stroked his beard in a contemplative manner at the sight of her reactions. After heaving a faint sigh, Fairy Yue gently removed the jade slip from her forehead before a wry smile appeared on her face. Is there something wrong, fellow Taoist Yue? Could it be that the cultivation art recorded in the secret cave isn't actually the spirit refinement technique? The elderly man hurriedly asked. The cultivation art is real, and it's indeed the spirit refinement technique, but the conditions required to cultivate it are extremely rigorous. For those in the spirit realm like us, there's barely anyone who can cultivate it. But then again, that's no wonder considering this is a true immortal realm secret technique, so it only makes sense that it's unsuitable for us. However, the jade slip only contains the first half of the cultivation art. Perhaps the second part will contain some solutions, Fairy Yue said in a slow voice as she appraised Han Li with a meaningful look. The elderly man's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he also turned to appraise Han Li. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, but his expression soon returned to normal as he replied in a calm manner. Indeed, that's only the first half of the cultivation art. I'll be giving the second half to you after you teach me the golden seal text. What do you think of that arrangement, fellow Taoists? Haha, that's no problem at all. We promise to teach you the golden seal text in exchange for this cultivation art anyway. However, golden seal text is extremely complex and profound, and it can only be taught verbally so it will most likely take some time. The elderly man immediately agreed. Fairy Yue smiled upon hearing Han Li's condition, and she also chimed in. Seeing as Brother Han has secured the cultivation art for us, I will naturally also fulfill my end of the deal. However, this place is a little too close to the secret cave for comfort. Let's go somewhere safer before we teach Brother Han the golden seal text. You're right, Fairy Yue. Let's set off right away then, Han Li replied with a smile. Thus, the three of them reached a consensus, and after a brief discussion they flew away into the distance as three streaks of light. On the fifth day after Han Li's trio departed from the island, a dozen or so wrong beings appeared in the air above the canyon in the distance. Their leader was a human-faced wrong being that had the appearance of an elderly man, and he had a look of thunderous rage on his face as he looked down at the canyon, which had been razed to the ground. At this point, Han Li's trio was hiding within a small mountain countless kilometers away. They had carved out a hall deep within the belly of the mountain, and the three of them were seated in the hall with their legs crossed. With his immensely powerful spiritual sense, Han Li was able to learn day and night from his two impromptu teachers, and he mastered the golden seal text in just half a month. After verifying that there was nothing left for him to learn, Han Li gladly handed over the second half of the spirit refinement technique, and the elderly man and Fairy Yue were naturally ecstatic. After making replicas for themselves, they bade farewell to Han Li and went their separate ways. There wasn't much time left until the vast glacial realm closed, so they naturally had to find somewhere safe and obscure to attempt their breakthroughs. One immortal galaxy tree. Wait, if it can only be taught verbally, then how did Han Li record the cultivation art in a jade slip? During this final period of time in the vast glacial realm, Han Li didn't cultivate or prepare to break through any bottlenecks. Instead, he found another secluded mountain and carefully inspected the spirit refinement technique with the golden seal text that he had just learned. Even that mysterious energy back in the restriction had been unable to push him to the body integration stage, so there was naturally no way that a breakthrough could take place through more conventional methods. After all, he had progressed up 2 stages in rapid succession, so he had to consolidate both his mental state and newly gained magic power for a long time. Only then would he truly be prepared to attempt a breakthrough to the body integration stage. In contrast, every other foreign being who had ventured into this realm had all been stuck at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage for countless years. Only after determining that there was no way for them to make breakthroughs in the spirit realm did they decide to risk venturing into the vast glacial realm. Furthermore, according to some rumors, the final month or two before the closing of the vast glacial realm was when the spirit veins in this realm released its richest spiritual qi. As such, attempting breakthroughs during this time would likely increase one's chances of success. Thus, all of the foreign beings who entered this realm either went straight into cultivation to prepare for a breakthrough, or scoured the vast glacial realm for all types of rare and precious materials and treasures before attempting breakthroughs during the final months. There was also another category of beings such as Fairy Yue, who had entered the vast glacial realm with an ulterior motive to begin with. In any case, no matter which category one belonged to, everyone would begin attempting breakthroughs during the final month or two. Han Li was unique in that he was the only one who had entered the vast glacial realm prior to reaching the late spatial tempering stage, and the astonishing progress he had since made had never been seen even throughout history, so he was naturally an exception to this. However, the Golden Seal text truly was very profound. It took Han Li around a month just to comprehend the simplest part of the cultivation art, and a lot of this was simply an explanation, as well as words of praise for the cultivation art. And Li finally understood why Fairy Yue had proclaimed this cultivation art to be so troublesome. According to the parts that Han Li had deciphered, the spirit refinement technique seemed to be quite an extraordinary cultivation art even in the true immortal realm. It had even incorporated some laws of heaven and earth, and once successfully mastered, one's spiritual sense would instantly receive an incredible boost. The cultivation art was split up into 3 stages. Mastering the first stage could double one's spiritual sense, mastering the second stage could quadruple one's spiritual sense, and mastering the third stage could enhance one's spiritual sense by 8-fold or even more. Han Li was naturally quite astonished by the enormous enhancements being outlined, and it was certainly quite plausible that this spirit refinement technique was quite extraordinary, even in true immortal realm. However, just as Fairy Yue had stated, the conditions required to cultivate this technique were indeed extremely rigorous. There weren't many conditions, and the minimum cultivation base requirement was only the deity transformation stage. But one of the prerequisites was that one had to possess a sufficiently powerful body and spiritual sense so they could handle the immense backlash from the cultivation art. If one's spiritual sense were to be multiplied by this cultivation art, but their body and spiritual sense weren't powerful enough to handle such a drastic boost, then they would instantly self-detonate and perish. According to the guidelines stipulated by the cultivation art, one had to possess spiritual sense that was around twice as powerful as that of others at the same cultivation base if they wanted to cultivate the first stage. The requirements stipulated for one's physical body were even more diabolical. Even the extreme outliers in terms of physical constitution would only just barely satisfy the outlined conditions. It was extremely rare for anyone to be able to fulfill even one aspect of these 2 sets of conditions, and those who fulfilled both sets of conditions were virtually non-existent in the spirit realm. After all, most cultivators either excelled in one aspect or another, or were far from satisfying the conditions in both areas. As for the second and third stages, the requirements were even more insane. Fairy Yue was someone who specialized in magic power cultivation, which was why she had been so disappointed upon seeing these conditions. However, just as she had deduced, the second half of the cultivation art did indeed provide a solution. This consisted of 2 recipes for pills that Han Li had never heard of before. One of them was known as the body fulfillment pill, while the other was known as the soul condensing pill. According to the recipes, one of the pills could enhance one's spiritual sense, while the other bolstered one's physical body. Consumption of those pills over a long period of time could slowly allow one to satisfy the conditions required to cultivate the spirit refinement technique. Of course, such extraordinary pills couldn't be found in the spirit realm. The 2 pills' recipes were enclosed in an extremely detailed manner, and even the specific refinement process had been outlined. However, none of the main ingredients used were ones that Han Li had ever heard of. Hence, it would be next to impossible to refine these 2 types of pills in the spirit realm. After inspecting the conditions required to cultivate the spirit refinement technique, Han Li was quite astonished, but he also heaved a sigh of relief. He was pursuing the path of simultaneous cultivation, and his spiritual sense was far more powerful than that of others with the same cultivation base due to the great development technique he had cultivated in the past. Furthermore, with his provenance true devil arts and some body refinement pills he had consumed, his physical body was also insanely powerful. As such, he was capable of mastering the first stage even as he currently was. For the second stage, as long as he could master the first stage, his enhanced spiritual sense would most likely be able to just barely satisfy the conditions. In terms of his physical body, if he could cultivate his provenance true devil arts to the extreme and also had some luck come his way, then it wasn't a hopeless endeavor for him to satisfy the relevant conditions, either. As for the third stage, Han Li could only stroke his chin with a wry smile on his face as he inspected the required conditions. In any case, Being able to double his spiritual sense through the spirit refinement technique would naturally be extremely useful. Not taking into account anything else, if he could master this first stage, he estimated that his chances in battle against body integration stage beings would increase by at least 20%. Thus, time slowly passed by as Han Li studied the spirit refinement technique. On this day, Han Li was meditating within the belly of the mountain when a buzzing sound suddenly rang out from his storage bracelet. His heart stirred as he hurriedly opened his eyes and looked down at the storage bracelet, just in time to see 3 balls of golden and silver spiritual light emerge from within it. These were none other than the 3 vast glacial badges. The 3 badges swayed slightly, before vanishing into specks of spiritual light right before his eyes. The ground then began to tremor slightly, and the world's origin chi in the nearby area was also thrown into disarray. "Is it time?" he murmured to himself as spiritual light flashed from his body, and he flew away as a streak of azure light. Moments later, the azure light receded in the air above the mountain, and Han Li appeared with his gaze directed upward. 5 colored clouds had appeared in the sky over the vast glacial realm, and they were churning violently amid gusts of fierce winds. The tremors running through the ground were also growing stronger as rocks and stones rolled down the mountain, and some of the trees were also being tipped onto their sides. All types of flying and land-dwelling beasts rushed out of the mountain before escaping toward flat ground as quickly as they could. Han Li clasped his hands behind his back and slowly closed his eyes with a solemn look on his face as he sensed the violently surging world's origin chi around him. Prior to entering the vast glacial realm, he had been told that these phenomena were signs that indicated that the vast glacial realm was beginning to close. After half a day at most, outsiders like them would be forcibly ejected by the power of laws in this realm. As such, they had left behind their own marks on the formation prior to departing, and they were also carrying special treasures that could resonate with the formation, thereby ensuring that they would be sent back to where they had first departed from. Han Li thought back to all of the rewards he had reaped during his time in the vast glacial realm, while sensing the astonishing changes taking place around him, and all of a sudden, his expression changed slightly. He opened his eyes in a surprised manner before turning toward a certain direction. There, 2 streaks of light, one golden and one white, were hurtling toward him beneath the layer of 5 color clouds in the sky. The 2 streaks of light were quite dim, but the white light was clearly more powerful than the golden light, and the latter was being hunted down by the former. The streak of golden light up ahead struck Han Li with a sense of familiarity, and blue light flashed through his eyes, allowing him to see the 2 creatures within the streaks of light, upon which a surprised look appeared on his face. There was a giant golden wolf within the golden streaks of light, and it was fleeing with all its might. Its fur was ragged and in tatters all over its body, and it was none other than the dark beast monarch that Han Li had encountered twice before already. The white light that was giving chase contained a winged white tiger monster, and it was also in a rather sorry state, but it was determined to hunt down the dark beast monarch. The 2 flew through the air, one after another, and due to the fact that both of them were completely spent and Han Li was concealing his aura, both of them failed to notice him. A series of thoughts raced through Han Li's mind, yet before he had a chance to decide what he wanted to do, a low roar that was filled with eagerness and anxiety suddenly rang out from within his sleeve. The sound came from the leopard Kirin beast in Han Li's spirit beast bracelet, and it seemed to be reacting very strongly to the 2 oncoming beasts. Han Li's heart stirred slightly as he sensed the leopard Kirin beast's reaction. He naturally thought back to how the beast had devoured several high-grade demon beast demon cores, resulting in changes that he still couldn't quite comprehend even to this day. Thus, a cold look appeared in his eyes as he turned toward the streak of golden light in the distance. A loud thunderclap rang out as a pair of wings appeared on his back, and he vanished as an azure and white thread in a flash. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted above the dark beast monarch, and a giant golden figure with 3 heads and 6 arms appeared. The golden figure's 6 arms swept through the air, and 6 pillars of golden light erupted forth like lightning, reaching the dark beast monarch in the blink of an eye. The dark beast monarch's early body integration stage powers should have allowed it to evade these attacks, even if it had been caught off guard, but it was currently a completely spent force with less than a tenth of its magic power remaining. As such, even though it tried to evade with all its might, it was still struck by 3 of the pillars of golden light. A rumbling boom rang out as piercing golden light inundated the dark beast monarch's body. Immediately thereafter, spatial fluctuations erupted up above once again, and a giant black mountain that was over 10,000 feet tall appeared alongside a giant silver ruler, both of which then crashed down in unison without any delay. Countless silver runes surged forth from the underside of the mountain, forming a giant light formation that instantly sent a burst of enormous power crashing downward. After being struck by the three pillars of golden light, the dark beast monarch had only just barely returned to its senses before an overwhelming weight appeared over its body. It immediately let loose a thunderous roar of rage and alarm, and its fur instantly stood up on end before transforming into a vast expanse of golden light that surged through the air. With the dark beast monarch's body integration stage powers, the golden light would have been able to free it from the surrounding restrictions under normal circumstances. But in its severely debilitated state, the golden light only managed to travel around 10 feet away from its body before being stopped cold by the enormous weight crashing down from above. A fearful look appeared on the dark beast monarch's face. It possessed a range of powerful abilities, but without magic power to support itself, it was unable to unleash any of them. Right at this moment, the giant silver ruler up above swayed before conjuring up countless ruler projections, all of which crashed down upon the dark beast monarch. The dark beast monarch let loose a shrill cry of anguish as its physical body was instantly surrounded by countless arcs of silver lightning, sending the acrid smell of burning flesh and fur wafting through the air. Right at this moment, a giant azure sword also swept downward from above. The dark beast monarch was completely immobilized by the enormous weight and silver lightning, so it was unable to evade. Azure light flashed, and its body was sliced in half. A loud explosion rang out, and a golden dark beast that was around half the size of the original dark beast monarch suddenly sprang out of the carcass. A burst of crimson mist erupted from its body, and it flew through the air as a ball of crimson light. A faint cry of surprise rang out from the nearby space, following which a resounding boom erupted. The giant black mountain had instantly teleported through the air, before crashing down upon the fleeing crimson light with unerring accuracy. However, a peculiar scene then ensued. The crimson light instantly erupted in all directions, while a thin streak of golden light shot forth from within. It was a fist-sized golden dark beast on this occasion. It had left behind another empty husk in its attempt to escape. A cold harumph rang out from above, and silver light flashed, following which a head-sized silver fire raven abruptly appeared ahead of the fleeing miniature dark beast. The fire raven spread its wings and pounced toward the golden dark beast, which didn't have enough time to evade and was devoured by the bird. The miniature dark beast didn't even get a chance to utter a single sound before it was incinerated into nothingness by the spirit engulfing heavenly flames. Right at this moment, a dull thunderclap rang out, and an azure and white thread of light abruptly appeared near the silver flames. The light then receded to reveal Han Li, and he quickly raised a hand and made a grabbing motion. A thumb-sized golden crystalline core was immediately drawn out of the flames and into his grasp. It was none other than the dark beast monarch's demon core. Han Li only briefly inspected the demon core before casting his gaze toward another direction. There, the white-winged tiger demon was situated several thousand feet away, appraising the demon core in Han Li's hand in an enraged manner. There was a greedy look in its eyes, but it didn't dare to approach Han Li. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he waved a hand toward the giant black mountain and silver ruler, upon which both treasures reverted back to their original size before flying back to him. Meanwhile, he merely held the demon core and stood still in midair, appraising the white tiger demon in a completely expressionless manner. The phenomena taking place in the surrounding area became even more violent, and arcs of silver lightning began to appear among the five-colored clouds. Immediately thereafter, torrential rain began to fall, and a dense layer of mist appeared over the entire sky. The white tiger demon became rather blurry in the distance, and it was still hesitating about how to proceed. Han Li harumphed coldly as a disdainful look on his face, and he flapped his wings gently, conjuring up balls of azure and white lightning that hovered around him. A string of loud thunderclaps rang out, and the white tiger demon's pupils abruptly contracted upon seeing this. It then let loose an indignant roar before reluctantly flying away as a ball of white light. Han Li didn't set off in pursuit of the white tiger. Instead, after it disappeared into the distance, he flapped his wings again, and all of the balls of lightning silently disappeared. The small black mountain and silver ruler also vanished in a flash. This white tiger was also at the early body integration stage, and it had far more magic power left than the Dark Beast Monarch did. The vast glacial realm was about to close soon, so Han Li naturally wasn't willing to take any risks by going after the white tiger beast. It was simply not worth risking any mishaps at such a critical juncture. The white tiger beast was clearly quite an intelligent creature. It was extremely furious that Han Li had taken its prey, but the ease with which he had slain the Dark Beast Monarch made it realize that there was no way it could defeat Han Li in its current state. As such, it could only reluctantly depart. The leopard Kirin beast was becoming more and more excited in the spirit beast bracelet, and it was already beginning to snarl incessantly, clearly very eager to get its paws on the Dark Beast Monarch's demon core. It was transmitting its will to Han Li, and he could tell that it was growing very impatient. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he sent the golden demon core into the storage bracelet. An elated cry immediately rang out from within the bracelet, and the leopard Kirin beast eagerly swallowed the demon core whole. It then transmitted emotions of gratitude toward Han Li before immediately sprawling onto the ground and closing its eyes. Not long after that, it fell into a deep slumber. This had already happened once before when the leopard Kirin beast had devoured the demon cores of those high-grade dark beasts, so Han Li wasn't surprised by this at all. Instead, he was looking forward to seeing how the leopard Kirin beast would turn out after this. The inner core of the Dark Beast Monarch was clearly far superior in caliber to those of the high-grade dark beasts, and he was very much looking forward to seeing how it would enhance the leopard Kirin beast. After that, Han Li hovered in midair and didn't do anything else. Several hours later, a thunderous rumbling boom rang out from within the five-colored clouds, and they came plummeting down from above. Han Li's body was instantly inundated by cloud and mist, within which lightning was flashing violently, and bursts of astonishing spatial fluctuations were surging in all directions. After about 10 minutes, all of the cloud, mist, and lightning in the sky suddenly dissipated, and Han Li had already vanished. The same scenes were unfolding all over the vast glacial realm, and thousands of foreign beings were ejected from this realm by the power of laws. The piercing five-colored light flashed before his eyes, and it was impossible to look directly into the light even with his bright-sight spirit eyes. The ground beneath his feet then disappeared, and he was struck by a rush of dizziness. When a solid surface appeared beneath his feet again, a deafening explosion suddenly rang out nearby, following which a chilly sensation descended toward his head. Han Li was quite startled by this development, and black chi immediately erupted from his body, upon which his black suit of heavenly devilish armor instantly appeared. Clang! He opened his eyes right as a faint clang rang out, and he looked up to find a flying sword that was around a foot in length above his head. It was currently being kept at bay by the black light being released by his suit of devilish armor, and the owner of the sword was a horned being in a suit of silver armor. It was a Jiao Kai being. Han Li's expression darkened as he inspected his surroundings, and he could see all types of treasures and balls of light of different colors hurtling through the air around him. There were thousands of foreign beings engaged in battle with one another, and close to half of them were Jiao Kai beings, while the rest were the guards of the heavenly cloud races that were responsible for protecting the formations. High up in the air, there were two gargantuan Jiao Kai race battle arcs that resembled small cities hovering at an altitude over hundreds of thousands of feet. There were even more Jiao Kai beings and heavenly cloud beings engaged in battle up there. Most of the restrictions set up around the two giant formations had already been destroyed, and Cloud City had also become a fierce battlefield. Strangely enough, there were no holy race beings in this battle. Even the most powerful participants in this battle were only at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. Even so, the situation in the city was still extremely chaotic. The giant formations were buzzing and flashing incessantly, and he seemed to be the only one who had been teleported back thus far, so it was no wonder that he had been attacked first. Han Li's expression darkened even further, and he looked up at the Jiao Kai being who had just attacked him before sweeping a sleeve through the air to release a small azure sword. The sword flashed with azure light before suddenly vanishing into thin air. The Jiao Kai being was quite startled by the fact that Han Li's armor had managed to keep his flying sword at bay, and he was immediately struck by a sense of peril at the sight of the small azure sword that had just disappeared. Spiritual light instantly flashed from his body as he attempted to flee into the distance, but it was already too late. The azure sword appeared right beside the Jiao Kai being before whizzing around his neck, decapitating him in a flash. The headless body plummeted from the sky, and the unrelenting sword Qi completely destroyed the nascent soul hiding inside the body as well. Only then did Han Li raise a hand in an expressionless manner to withdraw his flying sword. Right at this moment, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted, and 4 humanoid figures appeared in the formation one after another amid flashes of spiritual light. Han Li narrowed his eyes, and he immediately recognized 2 of them. They were none other than Liu Shuye and Shi Kun. The other 2 consisted of an ordinary-looking middle-aged man and a young man, both of whom had entered the vast glacial realm as part of his group. Han Li swept his gaze over the middle-aged man, and his pupils abruptly contracted as he detected the early body integration stage spiritual pressure emanating from his body. This completely mundane-looking middle-aged man had successfully made a breakthrough in the vast glacial realm. The remaining 3 displayed no changes in their spiritual pressure, so they had all clearly failed. At this moment, spiritual light flashed from the other formation, and 4 more people appeared. Han Li cast his gaze toward that direction and only recognized one of the people there. It was Fairy Yue. The elderly man with the Su surname was nowhere to be seen. Fairy Yue wore a faint smile on her face, and her aura had also completely changed, indicating that she had also succeeded in her breakthrough to the early body integration stage. Han Li was rather surprised to see this. He knew that the probability of making a breakthrough was significantly higher in the vast glacial realm, but it was still quite astonishing that 2 of the 8 people who had returned thus far had made breakthroughs. Thankfully, the vast glacial realm only opened once every 10,000 years. Otherwise, there would most likely be more body integration stage beings on the Thunder continent than the other 2 continents combined. However, Han Li was rather perplexed about why his group had returned first. Was it merely a coincidence? Unbeknownst to Han Li, this was actually related to the profound heavenly fruit in his arm. As a treasure that was imbued with the power of laws of another realm, even though the profound heavenly fruit had been sealed in his arm, it was still rejected more vehemently by the power of laws of the vast glacial realm, which was why he had been teleported back first as the owner of the fruit. All of the heavenly cloud beings that had just returned from the vast glacial realm were stunned by the scenes unfolding around them. They had only left for about a year or so. How had the Jiao Kai beings already reached Cloud City? However, everyone who had managed to return alive from the vast glacial realm was very powerful and experienced in battle, and they knew that this wasn't the time to be asking questions. Spiritual light began to flash from the bodies of some of the more short-tempered heavenly cloud beings, and they all released their treasures as they prepared to join in on the battle. However, right at this moment, a ball of red light suddenly descended from above, appearing in the air above the 2 formations after just a few flashes. This was a benevolent-looking elderly man in a suit of blue armor. "You're finally back. All of the elders are facing the high-grade beings of the Jiao Kai race, so none of them are here. However, prior to Senior Wang's departure, he instructed me to tell everyone to head to the sentient fortress of the myriad ancient race as soon as you all return." The elderly man yelled in an urgent manner before tossing a badge down toward them, then rose up into the air again. Crimson lightning was released by the elderly man toward a Jiao Kai being who was flying toward him, and the Jiao Kai being let loose a loud roar as he also released balls of white flames in retaliation. Thus, the 2 became engaged in a fierce battle, and Han Li and the others were left staring at one another, wondering how to proceed. The badge was drawn into the hand of the middle-aged, who had just progressed to the early body integration stage, and he carefully assessed it using his spiritual sense before tossing it toward Fairy Yue in the other formation. Fairy Yue also carefully inspected the badge before concluding, "There's no mistaking it. The badge is real. I also recognize the fellow Taoist who brought the badge to us. That's fellow Taoist Yu of the Azure race. He's a guard at the panel of elders. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT." After a brief moment of hesitation, the middle-aged man said, "All right, then let's do as we're told. I'm sure Senior Wang has his reasons for issuing this instruction to us." He was speaking as if he were issuing orders, and it made sense, seeing as he was now a holy race being. Even so, Shi Kun and the others were still rather disgruntled to be ordered around like this, but they didn't have any reason to disagree, so everyone nodded in response. Thus, everyone in the formations rose up into the air and flew toward a certain part of Cloud City. Along the way, They occasionally encountered some Jiao Kai beings who attempted to stop them, but this was a group consisting of 2 early body integration stage beings and 6 late spatial tempering stage beings, so they naturally had no trouble at all brushing aside all of the obstacles in their way. After flying for a while away from the formations, Cloud City was still in a state of turmoil, and the number of Jiao Kai beings had clearly increased. There were Jiao Kai race battle arcs, battle beasts, and armored warriors littered throughout the entire city, and Han Li even caught sight of a super puppet that was close to 100,000 feet tall lying on the ground in a completely stationary manner. Its body was originally smooth and pristine white as jade, but it now resembled a jagged mountain, and there wasn't a single part of it that had been left unscathed. Han Li was quite startled by the sight of this puppet, and he quickly recalled the 12 massive balls around Cloud City. It was undoubtedly the case that this puppet had been manifested from one of those balls. These puppets were said to possess early body integration stage powers, so the fact that it had been felled was a clear testament to the powers of the Jiao Kai race army. It was most likely the case that the fall of Cloud City was inevitable. What was even more disconcerting was that they still hadn't seen a single holy grade being yet. It was as if all beings of that caliber from both sides had vanished from the city. Could it be that all of them were engaged in battle outside the city? Han Li silently flew along as these thoughts raced through his mind. Along the way, neither Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun spoke to him, acting as if Han Li were a complete stranger. Aside from Fairy Yue, who had verified the authenticity of the badge, no one else had uttered a single word. During this time, she had cast an occasional glance toward Han Li, but she merely smiled and refrained from speaking to him or transmitting her voice to him. Han Li didn't think much of this. He was much more concerned about the tumultuous state that the city was in. The Jiao Kai race army had breached the defenses of Cloud City, and he didn't know if that would impact his plan to use the super teleportation formation here. The group continued onward without encountering any holy grade beings, and they quickly arrived at 8 Cloud Mountains, destroying several battle arcs and over 100 battle carriages along the way. When they reached this place, there were no Jiao Kai beings to be seen, and instead there were many groups of heavenly cloud beings, all of whom were wearing suits of armor. Spiritual Qi was also erupting into the heavens from the 8 Cloud Mountains, forming layers of powerful restrictions. There were even massive puppets of different colors and azure copper battle carriages that could be seen within the nearby cloud and mist, creating quite a tense atmosphere. Han Li and the others were all quite surprised to see this, yet before they had a chance to ask any questions, a group of over 100 armored warriors rushed toward them. They were being led by a burly man with a dark complexion, and he seemed to recognize them. A smile appeared on his face as he said, "Welcome back, fellow Taoists. Elder Wang is waiting for you in the sentient fortress. Please come with me." The burly man's aura was rather peculiar, and even Han Li was unable to ascertain his cultivation base. He could only sense that this man seemed to possess a certain type of special ability that was extremely fearsome. Fairy Yue and the middle-aged man who had just reached the early body integration stage were quite startled to see this burly man, and they hurriedly stepped forward before extending respectful salutes. "Greetings, Senior Bing. My sincerest apologies for making you wait for us." Everyone else's expressions also changed drastically as they extended respectful salutes, and Han Li appeared to be the only one who didn't recognize this man, but he also cupped his fist in a salute. "There's no need for such formalities, fellow Taoists. The 2 of you have already reached the holy grade, so you can regard me as an equal. Follow me and I'll take you to Senior Wang," the burly man said with a nonchalant smile. "Senior Wang is in the fortress." The middle-aged man was rather taken aback to hear this before an elated look appeared on his face. Everyone else also heaved sighs of relief. With this grand ascension stage powerful being present, the situation surely couldn't be all that bad. The burly man smiled and nodded in response, but didn't say anything further as he flew directly toward a certain mountain. Han Li and the others naturally followed along, and all of the other armored warriors split up into 2 groups to escort them on either side. Moments later, everyone passed over a huge mountain before a fortress that spanned several kilometers appeared before their eyes. The fortress was enclosed within tall, sturdy walls, and there were series of silver statues situated atop those walls. Some of the statues were of beasts, while others were humanoid in form. The largest of them were over 1,000 feet in size, while even the smallest ones were around 70 to 80 feet tall. All of them were completely stationary, but there was an indescribable baleful aura emanating from them. There were rows of halberd-wielding, azure-armored warriors situated on top of the city walls, yet all of them were completely devoid of life force fluctuations, clearly indicating that they were nothing more than humanoid puppets. There were a dozen or so metal puppets that were thousands of feet tall near the fortress, and all of them were also standing completely still with different weapons in their hands. In the air above the fortress were 5 or 6 strange light formations, each of which was over 100 feet in size and flashing with spiritual light. Han Li couldn't help but wonder what purpose they were meant to serve. This was none other than the myriad ancient race fortress that Han Li had visited once before, and it was also where the myriad ancient race's Cloud City headquarters was situated. However, there were currently many streaks of light flying in and out of the fortress, and these were beings of all races, so the fortress had clearly become a temporary command base. Han Li and the others descended in front of the sentient hall behind the burly man, and they then entered the hall under the scrutiny of the 2 white-robed guards at the entrance. There were only 3 people in the hall, one of whom was sitting on a chair in a calm and collected manner. This was none other than the Grand Ascension stage being, the young man with the Wang surname. The 2 people standing beside him were only at the spatial tempering stage, and they were both listening to instructions from him in a respectful manner. "We pay our respects to the Grand Elder." Fairy Yue and the middle-aged man immediately led everyone else over to him to extend respectful salutes. "Welcome back. Looks like 2 of you have ascended to the holy race. That's not bad at all. You may all rise," the young man said with a faint smile on his face. Fairy Yue and the others naturally complied and rose to their feet. Only then did the young man cast his gaze over everyone, and Han Li didn't know if it was just a figment of his imagination, but he felt as if the young man's smile had widened further at the sight of him than in response to Fairy Yue and the middle-aged man's breakthroughs. He then thought back to how the young man had bestowed that heavenly astral seal upon him for no reason, and he was left feeling a little uneasy. Thankfully, the young man's gaze only lingered on Han Li for an instant before he waved a hand toward the other 2 spatial tempering stage beings present, and they immediately exited the hall. The situation is rather special right now, so I'll keep this short. As I'm sure you've all seen, this is the current state of Cloud City. It's quite simple. We fell into a trap sprung by the Jiao Kai race. They lured our main frontline forces to a certain perilous place and temporarily trapped them in there. The Jiao Kai race army took advantage of this to conquer 13 cities in succession, and they're now at Cloud City. Our city's main formation diagram has also been stolen by them, so we can't even use the formation to oppose their army. Hence, we'll have to abandon this city soon. All of you should also retreat to the nearest concealed worm city, the young man said in a calm manner. The situation's that horrible already. Surely with you here, the situation wouldn't warrant abandoning Cloud City, Senior. Fairy Yue was quite stunned to hear this, as was everyone else. Do you think the Jiao Kai race didn't send any Grand Ascension stage beings themselves? There are 2 Grand Elders of the Jiao Kai race in this invading army, and they notified me in advance that if I don't participate in this battle, they won't do anything either. Otherwise, the consequences would be very catastrophic. I won't be a match for 2 beings of the same caliber, but at the same time, they're not confident in their ability to kill me even after joining forces, which is why they gave me notification in advance at all, the young man explained. But there are several tens of holy grade beings in the city. If all of them join in on the battle, surely we'll be able to turn the tables. On the way here, we didn't see a single holy grade being. Could it be? The middle-aged man's voice trailed off as the worst-case scenario sprang into his mind. Don't worry, they're not in the city because they're attending to other matters. I'm sure that you've also noticed that there are no holy grade beings among the invading Jiao Kai beings, either, and that's all thanks to them. However, this situation won't last too long. The Jiao Kai beings will most likely react very quickly and directly send their holy grade beings to participate in this battle. Seeing as my hands are tied, this city will inevitably fall, and that's why I've issued the order to abandon this city, so leave with fellow Taoist Bing right away, the young man instructed as he waved a dismissive hand. Fairy Yue and the middle-aged man exchanged a glance before accepting these orders, and everyone else also did the same. Only Han Li's brows were slightly furrowed in a display of hesitation. By the way, please stay behind, fellow Taoist Han. I have something I need to discuss with you alone, the young man suddenly said as his gaze settled on Han Li. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, but he didn't dare to turn down the young man. Everyone else was internally rather perplexed about this, but they were all ushered out of the hall by the burly man who had led them here. Only then did the young man turn to Han Li, with a hint of a smile on his face. In the face of a grand ascension stage being who seemed to harbor ulterior motives, Han Li was naturally feeling a little uneasy, but he still asked in a respectful manner, "What are your instructions, senior? If there's something you need me to do, I'll be sure to complete your assigned tasks to the best of my abilities. I asked you to remain behind naturally because I want you to do something for me. Fellow Taoist Han, you hail from the human race of the Tian Yuan continent, right?" The young man immediately asked a question that gave Han Li quite a fright. "How did you know, senior? Could it be that you've also visited the Tian Yuan continent before?" Han Li's calm facade finally cracked as his heart thumped violently. I haven't just been to the Tian Yuan continent. I have a few friends among your human race whom I became acquainted with through battle. Overall, the human race isn't a very powerful one, but there are a few abilities that are passed down from generation to generation that are not to be looked down on. It's just that the conditions required to cultivate them are very rigorous, and are therefore beyond the reach of the average human," the young man chuckled. "In that case, there's nothing for me to hide. I am indeed a human from the Tian Yuan continent who ended up here completely by chance." Han Li could only admit the truth. I'm glad you're coming clean, fellow Taoist. What is your relationship with Fairy Eye Soul? Why do you have her spirit void cauldron within your body?" The young man smiled and asked another question that had Han Li feeling rather taken aback. "Spirit void cauldron? Could you be referring to this treasure?" Han Li blinked in a surprised manner before opening his mouth to expel a ball of azure light, within which was a miniature cauldron. It was none other than the heaven void cauldron. "So you really do have it. I haven't seen this treasure for many years, but it still gives off about the same aura as it did back then," the young man said in a slow voice as he inspected the cauldron through narrowed eyes. "I do indeed know of Fairy Eye Soul, but this is the heaven void cauldron, not the spirit void cauldron," Han Li corrected with a wry smile. "Heaven void cauldron." The young man was rather taken aback to hear this, following which a thought suddenly seemed to have occurred to him, and he made a grabbing motion toward the miniature cauldron. The cauldron's connection with Han Li was immediately severed before being drawn into the young man's hand in a flash. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, but it then quickly reverted back to normal. The young man held the cauldron in his hand and began to carefully appraise it. After a while, the young man's brows furrowed slightly, and he mused, "Upon closer inspection, this does appear to be somewhat different from the spirit void cauldron. The refinement method is a bit less sophisticated, but it's not a replica either. If I had to give my verdict, I'd say that it's an experimental predecessor to the spirit void cauldron." An experimental cauldron. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. "So be it. This may be the wrong treasure, but it definitely still came from fellow Taoist Ice Soul, so I'm sure you're somehow related to her. I asked you to stay behind as I want you to track down Fairy Ice Soul when you get back to human territory and give her an item and a letter from me," the young man said as he released the miniature cauldron with a nonchalant smile. "Truth be told, I only came across this treasure by chance, so I don't actually know Fairy Ice Soul personally, nor do I know if she's even still alive anymore," Han Li hurriedly countered as he drew the heaven void cauldron back into his body. He had first heard about Fairy Ice Soul back in the human world, and if she had really ascended to the spirit realm and lived to this very day, then she would most likely be comparable in power to the young man before him already. As such, he didn't want to accept this potentially troublesome errand for no reason. "It's all right even if you don't recognize her. With her significant reputation, I'm sure you'll be able to track her down once you return to the human race. If fellow Taoist Ice Soul is indeed no longer of this world, then you can pass on these items to her descendants as well," the young man replied in a nonchalant manner. He then flipped a hand over to produce a jade box and a blue jade slip, which he tossed toward Han Li with a flick of his wrist. Seeing as this was an unavoidable task, Han Li could only heave an internal sigh before catching the two items and taking a glance at them. Each of the items had a shimmering golden talisman plastered over them to seal them tightly. "I refined those two talismans myself, and aside from Fairy Ice Soul herself or a descendant of hers who bears her bloodline, anyone else who tries to tear off those talismans will make them explode on the spot, so please keep that in mind. I won't ask you to do this for me free of charge. Here are some precious materials that can only be found on the Thunder continent as repayment for your efforts." Also, Kai and Jizzy and the others have already promised you access to the super teleportation formation. But due to this ongoing battle, all of the teleportation formations in the nearby cities have been sealed. The super teleportation formation just so happens to be situated within a secret hall in Concealed Worm City, and it's also been sealed. I'll pass down an instruction for them to allow you to use the formation once. Of course, prior to this, I'll have you swear a vow on your inner demons that you'll carry out the duty I entrusted to you before I issue this instruction, the young man said. I hardly have any choice in the matter, do I? Han Li could only concede with a wry smile before making a hand seal and swearing a vow as he was told, then placed the two items into his storage bracelet. These vows weren't overly binding back in the human world, but ever since he had entered the spirit realm and reached the spatial tempering stage, the effects of these vows had become so potent that the inner demons resulting from them would pose the most fearsome obstacle in one's breakthroughs. Hence, these types of vows were extremely binding to high-grade cultivators. After quickly assessing all of his other options, Han Li swore a vow as he was told, promising that he would deliver the two items to Fairy Ice Soul or one of her descendants. The young man nodded in a pleased manner upon seeing this, then pulled out 3 more jade boxes before tossing them over to Han Li. These boxes naturally contained the aforementioned materials, and Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, accepting the boxes with a burst of azure light without even inspecting them. All right, you may leave now, the young man instructed in an expressionless manner. Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief upon hearing this, and after extending a respectful salute, he also departed from the hall. The young man looked on at Han Li's departing figure with a contemplative look on his face. When Han Li emerged from the sentient hall again, he was rather surprised to find a giant silver flying carriage waiting outside. The carriage was over 200 feet in length and was rectangular in shape. The patterns on its surface were extremely intricate, and it was being drawn by 6 massive praying mantis-like spirit beasts. Fairy Yue and the others were all standing on the carriage already, while the burly man with the dark complexion was standing patiently at the front of the carriage. Everyone immediately turned their eyes toward Han Li as soon as he emerged, and they all wore different expressions on their faces, but they all seemed to be waiting for him. Get on the carriage, fellow Taoist Han. We're about to set off, the burly man said with a smile. Thank you, senior. Han Li cupped his fist in a grateful salute before his body swayed, and he instantly appeared on the carriage. He then made his way over to a corner and sat down with his legs crossed in a completely expressionless manner. The burly man let loose a low cry, and the 6 giant beasts drawing the carriage suddenly revealed pairs of wings before flying into the sky with the carriage in tow. In the instant that the flying carriage rose up into the air, a green light barrier appeared around it, and it flew away as a ball of green light. The Jiao Kai race army had reached Cloud City, but the area beyond Cloud City was still devoid of Jiao Kai presence for now. As such, the flying carriage didn't encounter any mishaps as it flew away from the direction the battle was being waged at. Over half a month later, Han Li caught sight of the other major city of the Heavenly Cloud races, Concealed Worm City, in the distance. In contrast with Cloud City, which hovered high up in the air, this city was nestled within a set of boundless mountain ranges. Close to half of the city wall was constructed from a series of interconnected mountains, and there were also thousands of mountains of different sizes within the city. There were buildings of different sizes littered all over the city, regardless of whether it was on or between the mountains, and a series of spiral paths could be seen winding down the mountains, creating quite an interesting sight to behold. Concealed Worm City had clearly also been impacted by the Jiao Kai race army, and even from several tens of kilometers away, one could sense a tense atmosphere from the city. Not only were there bursts of restriction fluctuations proliferating from the city, there were also armored warriors who were constantly patrolling the nearby area, split up into groups ranging from a dozen or so to over 100. Even though the giant flying carriage that Han Li was on clearly bore the heavenly cloud crest, it was still stopped on several occasions to be checked by the armored warriors. However, after verifying the authenticity of an identification badge that the burly man produced, all of them backed away and allowed the flying carriage passage into the city without any impediment. Thus, the flying carriage landed in front of the city gate, and a spatial tempering stage armored warrior conducting checks at the gate immediately identified the burly man, upon which he hurriedly greeted in a respectful manner. Welcome, Senior Bing. These are the fellow Taoists who have just returned from the vast glacial realm, right? The elders of Cloud City have already notified us of your arrival in advance, so I'll take you to the Star Cloud Pavilion right away to see them." The burly man wasn't surprised at all by this arrangement, and he nodded at the armored warrior before turning to Fairy Yue and the others. "In that case, all of you can enter the city. I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll be returning to Cloud City." Everyone else naturally agreed, and after extending respectful words of gratitude toward the burly man, they all disembarked from the flying carriage. The burly man let loose a low cry, and the 6 spirit beasts immediately rose up into the air before quickly vanishing into the distance, along with the flying carriage. After Han Li and the others entered through the city gates, they immediately discovered that the city was extremely lively and bustling, but everyone wore anxious and concerned expressions. This made sense considering Concealed Worm City was the closest major city to Cloud City. Most of the heavenly cloud beings who had been evacuated from Cloud City had gathered here, thereby resulting in such high population density. They hailed 2 snowy white beast-drawn carriages on the street before instructing the drivers to take them to the Star Cloud Pavilion, and the carriages quickly flew toward a certain spirit mountain in the city. Han Li sat beside one of the windows of the beast-drawn carriage and looked out at the passers-by and buildings on the streets in an expressionless manner, seemingly in deep thought about something. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly as he caught sight of a certain figure on the street. This was a man in a set of gray robes with a head of white hair. He had a slightly sickly complexion about him, and he was currently speaking with someone in front of a materials shop. The other person wore a set of yellow robes, and his skin was of a light purple color. He had a menacing look on his face, and Han Li's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of him. After a brief moment of hesitation, he suddenly said, "Stop the carriage. I have something that I need to do here. I'll join all of you at the Star Cloud Pavilion soon." Everyone else was rather taken aback to hear this, but they naturally had no excuse to stop him. Thus, the coach driver stopped the carriage as he was told, and Han Li drifted down from it. The 2 people on the side of the street were clearly arguing about something, and their argument was quite loud. "You have to repay the spirit stones you owe me within 3 days. Otherwise, don't blame me for turning on you," the purple-faced man said in a threatening manner. "I'm sure you know about my situation, fellow Taoist Huang. There's no way I can gather so many spirit stones in 3 days." The elderly man with the sickly pallor shook his head in a troubled manner. "I don't care. I'm sure you know what consequences await you if you don't repay the spirit stones. If I don't get my spirit stones in 3 days, he. The purple-faced man chuckled coldly. The elderly man's expression changed slightly, and he was just about to say something when a hint of bewilderment suddenly appeared in the eyes of the purple-faced man standing before him. A calm male voice then rang out from behind the elderly man. "How many spirit stones does Senior Marshal Brother Xiang owe you? I'll repay you in his stead." The elderly man's heart jolted upon hearing this. The voice seemed to be coming from right behind him, but why couldn't he sense the person who had spoken when they were clearly so close to him? He hurriedly turned around to find a young azure-robed man standing around 10 feet away from him. This was a man with a set of ordinary facial features, and he had a hint of a smile on his face. It was naturally none other than Han Li. "Junior Marshal Brother Han." An elated look immediately appeared on the elderly man's face at the sight of Han Li. "Long time no see, Senior Marshal Brother Xiang," Han Li said with a smile. Indeed, it had been many years since Han Li had last seen Xiang Zhili in Cloud City. "I see you've come to Concealed Worm City as well, Junior Marshal Brother. Prior to leaving Cloud City, I tried to find you, but I was unable to find any information on your whereabouts," Xiang Zhili said with a smile. "I've indeed been in a rather secretive place of late. My apologies for making you go through so much trouble, Senior Marshal Brother Xiang. How many spirit stones do you owe him?" Han Li asked. The purple-faced man was at around the same cultivation base as Xiang Zhili, so he was only at the core formation stage, and his spiritual sense was completely unable to identify Han Li's unfathomable cultivation base. As such, his face immediately paled, and he hurriedly extended a deep respectful bow toward Han Li. "I wouldn't dare to ask for spirit stones from you, Senior. I didn't know that fellow Taoist Xiang had such connection. Please accept those spirit stones as an offering from me to you, Senior." Do you take me for someone who threatens people into waiving debts? Tell me how many spirit stones he owes," Han Li insisted in a cold voice. "It's not much, only." The purple-faced man's heart immediately jolted as he hurriedly revealed a number that was completely insubstantial to Han Li. Thus, he flipped a hand over to summon a leather pouch, which he tossed toward the purple-faced man. "There's your spirit stones. You can leave now." The purple-faced man hurriedly bowed several times in a panicked manner before fleeing the scene. "I'm truly embarrassed to show you such a sorry state and make you pay for my debts, Junior Marshal Brother Han," Xianxia said as he cupped his fist with a wry smile following the purple-faced man's departure. Han Li raised a hand to conjure up a gray light barrier, then smiled as he said, "It's all right, those spirit stones aren't of any consequence to me. I'm truly surprised to see you here, Senior Marshal Brother Xiang. I recall that you asked me to come and meet you before I returned to the Tian Yuan continent. You can tell me what you have to say now." With the temporary restrictions set up by the divine essence effused light, no one would be able to eavesdrop on them. Xianxia was naturally unaware of what kind of ability Han Li was using, but he clearly had great confidence in it, so Xianxia naturally knew that this was quite a powerful restriction. His eyes immediately lit up with excitement, and he asked, "Are you saying this because you can return to the Tian Yuan continent, Junior Marshal Brother?" "Indeed, I did some things for the heavenly cloud races not long ago, so they've granted me permission to use their super teleportation formation once. I'll be leaving the Thunder continent soon," Han Li said in a calm manner. "That's great to hear. However, the item I wanted to entrust to you isn't on me right now, and this isn't a suitable place to discuss these matters anyway. How about this? Can you go and wait for me on the Azure Worm Peak close to 100 kilometers outside of the city and wait for me there? We can discuss things in greater detail there," Xianxia said in an elated manner. A barely detectable hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon hearing this before he nodded in response. "Azure Worm Peak. In that case, I'll meet you there." "Then it's settled. By the way, you've made significant strides in your cultivation base again, haven't you? I can't identify your exact cultivation base, but from the pressure I'm sensing from you, you've clearly become more powerful than last time," Xianxia exclaimed. "I only made a minor stride in my cultivation," Han Li replied with a nonchalant smile. Thus, the two of them chatted for a while longer before the divine essence-effused light barrier was withdrawn, and Han Li departed on another beast-drawn carriage. Meanwhile, Xianxia remained standing on the spot, looking on at the departing carriage with a slightly unnatural smile on his face. Concealed Worm City was quite a massive city, but it was still slightly smaller than Cloud City. After only around an hour, the beast-drawn carriage that Han Li had taken arrived at the foot of a mountain, and on that mountain was a set of interconnected buildings that surrounded the entire mountain peak. Han Li followed the coach driver's instructions and traveled up the mountain path, but many armored warriors suddenly emerged in a cautious manner halfway up the mountain. Thankfully, Liu Shuyer and the others had clearly just traveled through the same point, so after Han Li revealed his identity to the armored warriors, they allowed him to pass through without any fuss. After a short while, Han Li appeared outside a massive pavilion atop the mountain peak. There was a golden plaque above the pavilion gate, upon which the words Starcloud Pavilion were inscribed in large shimmering silver ancient characters. There were 8 silver-robed beings with longswords on their backs standing on either side of the gate in an expressionless manner, and to Han Li's surprise, there was a slightly chubby yellow-robed elderly man who was standing in front of the pavilion with his hands clasped behind his back. As soon as Han Li appeared, the yellow-robed man immediately approached him with a smile. This elderly man was none other than Qian Jizi of the myriad ancient race. Han Li extended a respectful greeting, in response to which Qian Jizi merely waved a hand with a smile. "No need for formalities, fellow Taoist Han." He then swept his spiritual sense toward Han Li, upon which his expression suddenly changed slightly. You've already reached the 9th tier, fellow Taoist Han." Han Li heaved an internal sigh, but his expression remained unchanged as he replied, "I encountered some minor opportunities that allowed me to make these breakthroughs." Even though his cultivation base had progressed to the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, he had used a secret technique to conceal it, so Liu Shuyer and the others naturally failed to detect this. As for Fairy Yue, she had progressed to the body integration stage, but her progression was quite recent, so her spiritual sense was still inferior to Han Li's, and she naturally also failed to detect anything as a result. As for the young man with the Wang surname, he was able to immediately identify Han Li's progression, but as a grand ascension stage being, he naturally didn't pay much heed to this and didn't even bother to mention it. As a late body integration stage being, Qian Jizi was also able to identify Han Li's progression. The surprise on Kai and Jizzy's face quickly disappeared, and a calm smile returned. Surely progressing 2 ranks in succession can't be referred to as a minor opportunity, he. In any case, I came here especially to see you, fellow Taoist Han. Please come with me. There are 2 other people who would also like to see you. 2 other people. Han Li was naturally slightly taken aback to hear this. Indeed, but don't worry, these 2 are both acquaintances of yours, fellow Taoist Han, Kai and Jizzy assured in a meaningful voice. A series of thoughts rapidly raced through Han Li's mind upon hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged as he replied, I'm naturally happy to comply with your wishes, senior. All right, then come with me. Kai and Jizzy nodded in a pleased manner before turning and walking into the pavilion. Han Li hesitated momentarily before also following along. He wasn't afraid that Kai and Jizzy would turn on him. After all, he was the elder of a race, and there were so many witnesses around, so he certainly wouldn't do something that would ruin his own reputation here in the Starcloud Pavilion. With Kai and Jizzy leading the way, the silver-robed guards on either side of the gate naturally granted them free passage. Inside the pavilion was a large hall that was completely empty aside from a few small teleportation formations. Kai and Jizzy led Han Li directly into one of the formations, and light flashed before Han Li found himself in another hall. This hall was only just over 200 feet in size, and the teleportation formation underfoot lay at the direct center of the hall. There were some tables and chairs positioned around the hall, and there were huge head-sized crystals embedded into the ceiling, releasing white light that illuminated the entire hall so that it was as bright as day. Han Li cast his gaze around the hall, upon which his attention was immediately drawn to the 4 people in it. There were 2 men and 2 women, 2 of whom were seated while the other 2 were standing. All of them were indeed acquaintances of his. They were Kai Liting and Liu Shuyer, as well as Duan Tianren and Shi Kun. Han Li was rather perplexed about why they would want to see him, but his expression remained unchanged as he extended a respectful salute. Han Li pays his respects to Senior Kai and Senior Duan. No need for formalities, fellow Taoist Han. It was all thanks to you that fellow Taoist Kai and I were able to secure the items we were looking for, Duan Tian replied as he appraised Han Li, upon which a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. It was quite clear that he had also identified the startling progress Han Li had made. Kai Ling hadn't said anything yet, but a peculiar look also flashed through her eyes. I was only doing what was expected of me. I'm not worthy of your gratitude, seniors, Han Li replied with a modest smile. However, he was feeling a little befuddled by this situation. Kai and Jizzy was standing right beside him, but he wasn't surprised at all by what Duan Tianren was saying. It seemed that he already knew of their agreement. There's no need to be so modest, fellow Taoist Han. I heard from my disciple that you're far more powerful than even we had anticipated, and if it weren't for your efforts, we wouldn't have been able to secure the treasures from the vast glacial realm anywhere near as smoothly as we did. Now that you've made such significant progress in your cultivation base, your powers are most likely no less inferior to those of a holy race being, so you can refer to us as equals, Kai Liting said with a smile. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this before glancing at Kai and Jizzy and Duan Tianren, both of whom wore calm expressions and raised no objections to Kai Liting's words. A series of thoughts quickly raced through his mind, and he smiled as he asked, I must have been called here for a reason, right? Could it be that there are some difficulties surrounding the super teleportation formation, seniors? We promised to let you use the formation, so we naturally won't go back on our word. Besides, Senior Wang has also spoken to us about this matter, and none of us would dare to go against his wishes, Kai and Jizzy replied as he stroked his beard. Then, Han Li could roughly deduce what he had been summoned here for, but he gave nothing away. Please don't misunderstand, fellow Taoist. We heard from our disciples that you emptied the entire medicine garden within that restriction, and I'm sure many of the spirit medicines in there are extremely rare or even extinct in the spirit realm, and most of them would likely be very useful to holy-grade beings like us. You are indeed very powerful, but you haven't progressed to the holy race yet, so those spirit medicines won't be overly useful to you at the moment. As such, the 3 of us would like to propose a mutually beneficial exchange, Kai Liting said with a smile. An exchange? What do you propose, seniors? Han Li remained quite calm upon hearing this, and his calm demeanor came as a slight surprise to Kai and Jizzy and the others. The 3 of them exchanged a glance before Duan Tianren cut straight to the chase. All 3 of us have reputations to uphold, so we definitely won't force you into any unfair trades. The three of us each have some spirit pills that will assist in breaking through the holy grade bottleneck, as well as some treasures and materials that will be of use to you, and we would like to use them to exchange for your spirit medicines. Those medicines must indeed be extremely precious, but I'm sure making a breakthrough to the holy grade is more important to you, fellow Taoist Han. Pills that can assist in breaking the holy grade bottleneck. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. Indeed, we all prepared large quantities of such pills back when we made our breakthroughs, and even though most of them were consumed during that process, the three of us combined naturally still have quite a few of these pills left. With these pills, your chances of making a successful breakthrough will be increased by at least 20% to 30%, Duan Tianren said in a proud manner. Of course, the amount of pills and treasures we're willing to offer will depend on the types and quantity of spirit medicines you obtain from the medicine garden, Kai Ling added. Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun were naturally already aware of the reason why Duan Tianren and the others had summoned Han Li here, and both of them were appraising him with envy in their eyes. They had also received immense benefits from Duan Tianren and Kai Ling following their return from the vast glacial realm, but those benefits still couldn't compare with what was currently being offered to Han Li. A hesitant look appeared on Han Li's face as he pondered this proposal. Kai and Jizzy and the others also fell silent to allow Han Li to process the situation. After a long while, Han Li finally exhaled as he made a decision. I did indeed secure a large quantity of spirit medicines in the restriction, but most of them are completely unrecognizable to me. It would naturally be fantastic for me if I could exchange them for the aforementioned pills, but I'm not sure if the spirit medicines will be of interest to you. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Han, the three of us have some experience, and I'm sure we'll be able to identify most of the spirit medicines. Even if we can't identify some of them, we'll be sure to do our best to give you a fair price, Kai and Jizzy hurriedly reassured. He was ecstatic that Han Li was willing to proceed with the exchange, as were Duan Tianren and Kai Ling, who also made similar promises. In that case, I'll bring out the spirit medicines for inspection. Han Li nodded before flicking his wrist, and a loud buzzing sound rang out from his storage bracelet as a burst of azure light erupted forth. The azure light flashed through the air, upon which hundreds of jade boxes of different styles appeared, and all of them were shimmering with faint spiritual light. Duan Tianren's eyes lit up as he made a grabbing motion toward the nearest jade box to him, and the lid of the box flew off on its own to reveal a crimson coral-like spirit plant that was around a foot in length and emitting a faint glow. What a massive flame coral herb, Duan Tianren exclaimed with a stunned look on his face. Han Li's pupils contracted ever so slightly upon hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged. This was one of the spirit medicines that he had been unable to identify, and if he recalled correctly, he had collected about 6 of them in total. Out of all of them, he had only brought out 1. Kai Ling and Kai and Jizzy exchanged an excited glance upon seeing this before also beginning to carefully inspect the contents of the jade boxes. As expected of holy-grade beings who had lived for over 10,000 years, most of the spirit medicines that Han Li couldn't identify had been recognized by them, and judging from their elated reactions, these were clearly all extremely precious spirit medicines. There were over 100 jade boxes that had been summoned, but the inspection of their contents was soon complete. After Kai and Jizzy appraised the spirit flower in the final box, he put the flower back into the box in a slightly reluctant manner, then turned to Han Li with a smile. These are indeed all spirit medicines that are very difficult to find in the spirit realm, but judging from the size of that medicine garden, I'm sure there would have been more spirit medicines in there. How much more do you have, fellow Taoist Han? You can bring them all out for our inspection.